Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Thursday, July 11th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. It is going to be a long show, a lot to cover, not just because of the other things around the side that have caused me to not be able to do a show yesterday and days before that, but just because there is a lot to, let's put it this way, a lot of discussions which we already have been covering, developing in interesting ways that I think are very much worthy of coverage. A lot of times I tend to put stories off, cover it the next day, and try to, make sure the focal point is important. Today, a lot of things that I think are really important to follow up on, one of which is the SAVE Act, digital ID overlap conversation. Despite the fact that I felt like I was pretty clear about my stance, it seems that some of the people who've watched my show are under the impression that I'm against the act itself or the logic behind it, which I think I pretty much said the opposite. But we're going to get into this and show you yet again why I think the SAVE Act is a Trojan horse for digital ID. That's not even remotely to say that the idea of making sure citizens are the only ones voting is something that I'm against. This is how this game is played. It's constant and obvious how people within the paradigm, or outside for that matter, but mostly I see it there, are manipulated using things they care about, usually using important, genuine, real things that we do care about. That's how that tends to work the most effectively. So we're going to, right out of the gate, I want to highlight this point that overlaps with what the UK is also doing, using threats of immigration or within the discussions around it, weaponized immigration, migration, to drive in digital IDs, except they're just saying it right on the surface. We need digital IDs to deal with this problem. It's very, very obvious, and the overlap, the timing of it can't be missed. We're going to talk about a lot today. I want to start with the point that will kind of briefly be like a prelude to that discussion right there about something we discussed in AM Wake Up around the idea of, well, first is the point about Donald Trump and the ruling from the Supreme Court and why that's an important precedent. Again, from the two-party illusion perspective, not necessarily about one guy versus the other or one party versus the other, but looking beyond the immediacy of whether you support Trump or Biden and recognizing what the actual precedent set will do going forward. And that's the kind of view we should all have. But the party paradigms and, the two-party allegiances tend to drive people into focusing on the immediate point or the personal division point. We're also going to talk about an important development around Twitter, which, this has been as obvious as I've ever seen anything, but I think what's really important to see is the developments around the Yacarino element for the World Economic Forum overlap and the censorship conversation, Ben Shapiro in Congress, and this interesting conversation about how Elon is saving free speech, which is clearly not what's happening, but defending Republicans. Except when you find out that X has now aligned itself again with the World Economic Forum platform, or rather World Economic Forum agenda, as they call it in the tweet, their flagship product, GARM, or whatever the term is, in regard to censoring Republicans for those very concepts. All it shows you is exactly the point we're going to start with. The political dynamics, the division tactics, the wedge issues are used to blind people to their own interests. And it's happening right in front of you as they're high-fiving about Twitter while Twitter's aligning itself with the group that's the very thing they were, in regard to Republicans, pointing at moments ago about how they were being censored on Twitter, but before Elon. It's also interesting. And the bigger point is it all comes back to the large conversation about the direction this is all driving in. Not even censorship is a part of the game being played. It's about driving you in the direction, I think, of what we're talking about, whether it's digital IDs, any of these technocratic directions that overlap with everything he's doing. We're going to talk about the RSV vaccine conversation. I do that for a reason in regard to the monoclonal antibody point, which isn't a vaccine, but it's being framed that way in the conversation, which I'm not even sure why that is. I have opinions about it, but I'm mixed on why I think so, but it's about the children that died after being given this treatment. And how there's an interesting overlap that seems to get missed from the larger conversation around it online about how it's outside the purview, apparently, of the CDC and holding to account whether they're harming people because it's technically not a vaccine, but yet it's being called. It's really fascinating, but it shows you, and alarming, how we're still in this very clear direction, the problem. Not even just vaccines, if you want to call them that, but all of the treatments and really the way I've been saying it from the beginning, the intent behind all of these things, the groups behind all of these things. That's not to say that these different vehicles are inherently bad. I do have certain feelings on a lot of those things, but the idea is that the intent of the CDC, of the FDA, of your government at large is the problem. It doesn't matter what kind of outstanding and even if you want to get a lot, some kind of, positive tool, the people behind it are using it for negative ends. That's the real point about a lot of this stuff we're talking about. And of course, most of the conversation today after that is going to be around what's going on in regard to Gaza, Palestine, Israel, the lies of the ceasefire, which, I mean, if anyone has been following it the entire time, it's almost comically stupid at this point, how it's just the same thing. And all these high-minded journalists of the corporate media are acting like day by day, moment by moment, giving you all the details about how Hamas has agreed and Israel is fighting back. And now they're at the point where the plan's laid out, but now they're in the details. I'm like, okay, isn't that the same thing over the last 8 months? The same exact report where they both agree, but now the details. No, it's not what's happening. You're being lied to, and the Washington Post is embarrassingly lying about what's happening. It's clear that this is the same old dynamic where Israel's and as Haaretz and their own people in Israel call the same point out. Netanyahu is sabotaging the entire process. Haaretz wrote an entire article about it. We'll talk about that today. We'll talk about the ongoing famine, which now, as I was telling you, and anybody honest was highlighting, is now complete across basically the UN and other groups. IPC have publicly stated famine is here. It's all across Gaza, and children are starving as I say this, as we discuss this today. And we'll talk about the Lancet numbers, but not just the Lancet. The Lancet estimate of 186,000 total death toll in Gaza is an estimate, but it's based on expert opinions and all the data and facts we have in front of us. But it's not just that. I'm actually highlighting in my title today what other experts have looked in, come to the conclusion around these numbers. Dr. Gilbert being one of them, and their research around it, discussing that it could be as high as 500,000 or more. Now, these are estimates, understand. But the real point is that we pretty much, it's, in my opinion, a verifiable fact that the number we see is in the interest of trying to be as accurate and honest as possible, a dramatic undershoot of what we can. That's what they can prove. And as they're screaming about how it's all Hamas lies, recognize that they're all very aware these numbers are shockingly higher than 37,000, whatever it's at now. And yet, because they're honest about it, are telling you just simply what they can prove. Interestingly, what both the Israeli military and the intelligence both called accurate and reliable, but yet the screamers online will tell you it's all fake Hamas information, as well as all the people that stand in front of our media and give you all the lies. Now, we're going to talk about the West Bank as well. And, I'll leave it there because there's probably about 4 other things in there that we might not get to. I really hope I get all this through today because all of this stuff is very important. So we'll leave it there to start today. Let's begin with the interesting point around how this is all used. Now, I want to include this link, which I did on the last show since I mentioned as well, but we had a great talk on AM Wake Up on the 9th about a lot of different things. But one thing I really enjoyed our conversation around was this idea of the two-party illusion, as we've always talked about, and the idea that this is how this works. I think what I mentioned before, that I think Steve was the one making the point around how essentially you see the agenda playing out. Anyone that's aware of how these parties are illusory, as far, and not in the sense they don't exist, but that it's at the end of the day, your government achieving things and using this binary division to make it seem as if it's not just your government stealing things from you, but rather it's the other bad guy side and the good guy side over here is doing all the right things, and that oscillates over the years. But the idea that the agenda gets carried out, but each side of it plays a very specific role in compartmentalization. So you see one side doing part of it, like Trump being behind Operation Warp Speed. But, he had good intentions and Biden's the one that rolled it out. Well, one wouldn't be possible without the other. And the point, it goes back and forth, and it happens the same way where your two-party illusion is achieving the end while you end up pointing at one side or the other. And not only that, but the main thing we've been talking about, like I mentioned before, about Second Amendment being shall not be infringed, this is the reality. And we all acknowledge that. God-given inherent rights. There's no asterisk there. Except when suddenly they go, but not the trans people because they're crazy and they can't have guns. Well, okay, the bottom line was all that showed you was that that either they never believed in the idea that it was God-given, shall not be infringed, no limitations, like free speech, for example, same conversation. Ben Shapiro, Rubin, the rest now screaming for censorship around Israel when 30 seconds ago it was, no way, no, only the woke left are the ones using culture points to, whatever the narrative was. They suddenly started agreeing with censorship because it was in their interest. So they never believed in these things, or they're just hypocrites. And they only believe in it insofar as it achieves their ends. So my point is, that's not everybody. I frankly think that's a minority within the conservative, liberal, or we all see through it perspective. I see more and more from both sides of the paradigm seeing this stuff today. But the point is that they use these, and again, important issues. Nobody's arguing that censorship is unimportant. We all see that everyone in the government is actively doing it for their own reasons. It just ends up being half the story when you only focus on one side of the government. Or in the case we're going to talk about today, the SAVE Act and the conversation using the very real, important conversation of immigration, whether weaponized or not, or immigration. The idea being that it is a real and important conversation, or the idea that we should be, of course, making sure that people who are voting are American citizens. I don't even see how anybody can make a valid argument why that wouldn't be a central point. Not getting into the SAVE Act, but just the basic question. Do you think that only U.S. citizens should vote? It's not even a question. That's the law. And we all argue that's the way it should be, but there's undermining arguments. And the game is that I definitely think some people don't want that. And maybe they have good intentioned reasons. I find it hard to believe, but it's certainly possible somebody's been convinced that they should allow immigrants to vote because we should change the way we understand this country. This whole dynamic is built so people can have opinions and we can disagree with them. Having somebody like Elon Musk publicly state that you're a traitor if you think anything but yes on this bill is the entire problem. It's poisonous. Even if you think that there are, which I can guarantee you there are, people who are voting no because they have nefarious intentions. All of that to say is that it's important conversation. Within all of that, there's a clear Trojan horse, in my opinion, to drive in digital IDs. They can both exist at the same time. You can recognize other dynamics of weaponized issues and Democrats fighting for illegals to vote while also acknowledging that there's a Trojan horse to drive in the Real ID Act and the digital IDs, ID 2020, and the whole damn thing. So in this conversation I recommend you listen to, we get into a lot of that overlap. Now, I wanted to start with this. I laid out right there was essentially this and then into the next second segment. So we'll get to the point of the digital IDs and so on. But I think this is an important part to start with is just this. It's entertaining to a degree. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but this is what we're talking about. This idea of like Biden being senile. Nobody honest was under the impression that this guy was not struggling. It is transparent. And it's not just because people can see it who've been around this before. Anybody can recognize when a guy mumbles into nothing and turns away and doesn't answer the question. It's like, okay, he's either having a bad day or he's clearly struggling. And that happens again and again and again. Everybody knew this. All those media liars, they all knew that. It's not unique to the left of the conversation. The same damn thing happens with Trump or anybody else, not necessarily around being senile, but we all know this if we're being honest with ourselves. So around the conversation of Biden being senile and how they covered it up, I think we're missing a huge amount of there's multiple things revolving around this conversation, around this, not a part of it, but to the side of it, but we're not focusing on because everybody got consumed with this conversation. And what I find so important about this is it's things like this, whether it's using an important conversation that we all care about to then quietly slide in something else that you're not seeing, or straight up pointing and creating a diversionary tactic or conversation to get you looking anywhere else but what they're all doing everywhere else, whether it's the genocide or any number of other things we'll get into today. So I wanted to start with this for one reason, to show you that it's interesting also that we're seeing even the corporate media become so aggressive toward people like Karine. And I'm also going to make fun of her for one brief moment because, that's what I love to do because she's ridiculous. But this is a clip from them going back and forth around Biden. And I just want to first show you the first part of it to show you how even she seems to be a little bit like, hold on, guys, this is not how this is supposed to work. Stop yelling at me. Aren't we on the same team? It's kind of interesting to see.
To all of you. It's a very basic, direct question.
Wait. Hold on. Wait a second.
And one other setup was, remember, she was the one right before and during this kind of going, you're all wrong, cheap fake and deep fakes, by the way. And so she knows she's caught. It's interesting, though, that you see the corporate media do this when usually they're kind of quiet about stuff like this.
8 times, or at least once, in regards to
I
the
just
president
wait.
specifically.
Hold on a
That
second.
much you should be able to answer by this point.
Wait,
After
no,
4 days of
no.
reporting about it.
No, wait a minute. Ed, please. A little.
Ed, right? We're on the same team, right? We're friends, right? Like it's almost pathetic the way that that's what journalism should be. Not stopping. I'm asking you a question. Stop. And it's same with Matt Miller or any of the rest of them, but that rarely happens.
Respect here, please.
Respect.
So every year around the president.
That was she goes on and make this whole point about how she won't say the name of the person, even though it's public information. It's embarrassing. And this is at a time when I think people are starting to see through this stuff. And I think the media is seeing that they need to present themselves as something that is other than what they've always been doing. I think this is self-interest. I don't think this is corporate media suddenly realizing they have to care about things that are important. But what I'm going to show you is this part, which I think is hilarious.
It's physical 3 times. 3 times. And it is in the reporting that we share a comprehensive reporting. Matter of fact, it's more than what the last guy shared. And it is
I can't even say his name.
in line with what George W. Bush did. It's in line with what Obama did. And so it is comprehensive. It is out.
So that makes it okay, right? It's the same cheating, lying stuff they did before. So why do you care now? You're all cheating and lying.
There, I just read a quote from it, but I am not going to devolve somebody's.
I am not going to devolve somebody's name. Now, I just want to be clear. Yes, I'm making fun of her. Yes, it has nothing to do with the show today. But what I want to be clear about is that this, on a complete side point about how I'm always highlighting how ridiculous this person is and the whole dynamic of whether it's woke politics, whatever you want to call it, this is not a mistake. This is not some slip of the tongue. She routinely mispronounces or straight up uses wrong words. That's a lack of intelligence. It's not because she's black or lesbian. It's because she's not that bright. And we have to be honest about this stuff. We got to stop playing games, and again, you'll find that a lot of people are just want to stop, whether it's left or right. And both of them have their things, to just be real about this stuff. The reason that she's there is because this was about virtue signaling. It's about using these points to say, look, we've got the first gay black woman. Who cares? No, I mean, it's insofar that we care about that people should be treated equally. Yes, we care about that. Anybody should. The world will never be devoid of those things because that's the way the world works. Then we can point at people and say, you're gross because you do that. But to do this just to make that point when it is contradictory to, rather, there are people that are far better suited for this position, that's the insulting thing. That is racism. But I've made this point before. I just wanted to laugh at the fact that she said, instead of, I'm not going to divulge that person's name, it's embarrassing. People laugh at us because of this. Now, the reason to start with that point is to show you just the way that things are shifting and the idea that even in their dynamic, Karine is like, you're not supposed to push back on stuff like this. But I think what's interesting is that whole conversation took away from so many other important things happening. Now, this was from Off Guardian. Supreme Court makes the president a dictator for life, July 8th. Now, this is about Trump, and it's about, and this, to be clear, whether or not you feel that this is politically motivated in regard to the persecution of Donald Trump, which I 100% do. That's also not to say that I think he's innocent of crimes. Both of those things can't exist at the same time. But what's interesting is that aside from that, whatever you think about how this is being done or why, this precedent very clearly will not just be around Donald Trump. And this is the whole point. It's like Assange conversation. Whatever you think about what he did or who he is or what's driving his intentions, the precedent around that, again, whether it's judicial or not, is important to press freedom. So as they write, it says the Supreme Court has made it official. The president of the United States can now literally get away with murder, which interestingly was exactly the take that I had around Donald Trump and basically the ruling saying that he, cannot be, the same point, which it wasn't just about Trump, right? It's about the idea that going forward, this will forever be, same point. I'll let the article speak. It says in the devastating 6-3 ruling in Trump versus United States, that is equal parts political, short-sighted, self-servingly partisan, and utterly devoid of any pretense that the president is anything other than a dictator, the Supreme Court has validated, same point I made actually, what Richard Nixon once claimed. When the president does it, that means it's not illegal. It's a real quote by Richard Nixon. Now, this was important, which of course is attacked as partisan, which maybe she's being driven by partisan intentions. It doesn't make the statement false because I completely agree with it from a nonpartisan perspective. But Justice Sotomayor concluded in her dissent to this whole thing, the president of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses, I don't agree with that, but it said when he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution. That's what this precedent is creating. When he uses official powers under the majority's reasoning. Now, that's the way we pretend this all works. You think the majority is having any influence over what they decide to do in the White House? That's pretty naive. But anyway, the point is that's how we perceive it. It says orders the Navy SEALs Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. That's their opinion, but I agree with this. We already saw this happen. We saw them assassinate, well, she mentions in there, Soleimani and so on, or Biden supporting an ongoing genocide, which Trump and RFK both said they would do. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Whether Trump or Biden understand, takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That's her framing of it, but this is essentially the idea is that, well, we can't restrain them from, this is like the idea with Nixon. Well, sometimes these actions have to be taken for the interest of America. Well, this is subtly leaning into the idea that you're no better than anything else you claim you're fighting. If you're saying, well, we have to because they're doing that, wasn't the whole premise supposed to be that we're striking a different path, a better path, rules-based international order and all this? Well, that doesn't mean rules-based unless we have to because they did. It's kindergarten stuff. But she goes on to say, that is the majority's message today in regard to how they frame this as the majority. But it says, even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. And they go on to say the damage has indeed been done. Indubitably, irrevocably, unarguably. Every American should be outraged, offended, and afraid of what this ruling means for the future of our nation. Just remove the Trump part from your mind, guys. It has nothing to do with that other than he's the focal point for why this precedent was created. There can be no more pretending that we live in a constitutional republic. It's all out in the open now, they write. This is a dictatorship. Hitler has finally stepped out of the shadows, they write, which I'm not sure how they mean that, but you could argue they mean that there's clearly been an overlap to Nazi history around the U.S. creation, not Operation Paperclip and so on. And people talk about NATO and all sorts of overlaps there. The argument being they never really stopped being prominent in the direction of our world, which is pretty alarming to think about. You can decide for yourself, or maybe they just simply mean they're embodying that mindset. But it says the facts of the case itself, which asks whether President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution on charges that he attempted to overturn the 2020 election, which I actually don't think he did, are less important than the ramifications of this ruling. And that's what I'm saying. That's exactly the point, which goes so far as to dramatically expand the power of the presidency, rendering whoever occupies the Oval Office lawless and unaccountable, which frankly, in my opinion, that's already how it's been for a very long time, if not entirely. It's exactly how tyranny rises and freedom falls. Read the article. It's a great article. I definitely think this is something we should understand. Here's the ruling, if you'd like to read through for yourself from the Supreme Court. Oh, actually, wait a minute. Did I grab the wrong one? Oh, no, that's why. Okay, so it has the date up there from 2023, but it is July. So anyway, that's the ruling. This, by the way, random side note, maybe not even related. I just thought it was interesting. So right after this, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor, her bodyguard apparently shot a would-be carjacker outside of her house. I wasn't able to find a lot of detail around this, so maybe it's nothing, but I just find that interesting timing. Always important to highlight these things for further research. Now, in the larger point, it's not necessarily about her post up here, which is pretty contentious to some people out there. It's about this post, and just so you know, this her posting about this person's calling her out for her argument that, her argument is she's not saying she supports Hitler or that Hitler's a good guy, but simply highlighting that people have lied about, what the history around that, as well as the fact that the Allies did a hell of a lot of the same atrocities, if not arguably worse, in regard to one of the points she makes about the killing of German people well after the war because of the people they supported there, Bolsheviks, as well as a lot of other things. An interesting conversation. It's funny to me how facts, which is easy to look this stuff up, are suddenly uncomfortable because it seems to challenge a larger controlled narrative. Israel's going through that in every possible angle right now because they've lied about damn near everything in their history. But that's not the point for right now. The point is about this person randomly posting this underneath this post. It has nothing to do with anything. He just goes, I got it from here. Check this thing out. Trump shirt. Now, I just wanted to show you this shirt, which I think is funny. It says, if you still hate Trump after this Biden SHIT show, your commitment to stupidity is impressive, which is funny watching people go, yeah, Republicans. It's just, I'm like, this is what I said. What is impressively stupid here is the binary thinking you are displaying, as if one must by default love Trump because Biden's a senile criminal, or vice versa. They are both overt war criminals who do not deserve your respect, let alone your support. Two-party illusion. What's funny to me is that this is, people think this is logical, yeah, because without even realizing it, you're in the trap of the two-party game. In other contexts, you might even call it out, but here you're going, well, you got to vote for Trump because Biden's senile. What about any other choice? What about RFK? I think all of them, that's not what I'm saying. All of them, I think, are a problem, but why wouldn't that be part of the conversation? Oh, there you go. I had it still stuck on the video. I think that was all I was showing before that. Yeah, that's all I just showed was the ruling. I had the screen stuck for people. Sorry about that. Yeah, that was it. Just for those who had the screen stuck, all I was you heard me. Just for the podcast, I'm just re-showing the images because I had the screen stuck on the video. But here's the articles, and here's the ruling. There's the post. Now, back to this. The point is, there's a lot of other people involved in this conversation. There's not even just only 3 candidates, are there? There's plenty of other people running. But it's just ridiculous, this game where we lesser of two evils and just willfully ignorant about this. People fall right into the same dynamic. It's a problem. It really is. Now here, what's funny, Michael Tracy posted this about, same kind of conversation about Donald Trump. He says, you don't understand. When Trump bombed Syria twice, tried to overthrow the government of Venezuela, started arming Ukraine, expanded NATO twice, got record-busting military budgets, dropped a record number of bombs in Afghanistan, signed off on FISA warrantless surveillance, imposed massive sanctions on Russia, tore up arms control treaties, handed over the State Department to Mike Pompeo, stationed U.S. troops in Taiwan, assassinated Iran's top general, conducted a record number of drone strikes, installed a Raytheon lobbyist as his defense secretary, gave Israel absolutely everything it wanted, did enormous arms with deals with Saudi Arabia, and most recently orchestrated the passage of a $100 billion war funding bill. He was doing all that to fight the deep state. Just let's let that sink in and ask yourself how in the world you could overlook all the, I'm sure there's a narrative around every single one of those bullet points. Fighting the deep state, huh? Sounds like you are the deep state, quite frankly, with all the stuff we're talking about right there. It's no different. You remove Trump from the conversation, that looks like any presidency we could point out. So the point is that clearly the conversation around Donald Trump and the game that's being played, as this will lead us into the Republicans say back kind of like binary thinking around all this, people are willfully blinding themselves to the bigger picture because they feel like they need their, support a certain side, or that somehow Trump is the only possible choice. Dave Smith highlights this, saying the number one news story of the 2016, 2019, between those years, was that the Russians, in a conspiracy with Donald Trump, overturned our democracy and installed Trump, a Russian agent, a president, in quotes, or in parentheses. Of course, Vladimir Putin was cool and didn't overthrow our democracy in 2020, but that was the new year. Which is funny to think about, right? The idea that, so you're telling us he put him in place, but then that's, nothing else happened. Obviously, we all know Russiagate was a ridiculous, obvious, and completely shown to be false ploy, but it says the Russian agent is currently the front runner to be president, and no one in the media talks about it anymore. Ask yourself how that makes sense. He says, why is that? Are they all compromised by Russians now? Where on Rachel Maddow? Where are you? Isn't this your big thing? What about, we should be going, oh my God, the Russians are going to do it again. We're not even hearing about that. Well, we kind of are. It's starting again. But he makes a good point. He goes, or am I getting crazy now? Was the entire thing obviously BS from the very beginning? Yes, obviously, which is his point. But what I see in that, ask yourself why that wouldn't be the conversation. I genuinely think, whether the media talking heads know it or not, that Donald Trump is being driven into this position by the government. Not one side, the other, not Democrats or Republicans, but the government or the actual controllers of what this really is are putting him in place. Just like last time, by the way, but I think that's important to think about. And here, by the way, is what I was kind of saying. It is, but it isn't. This is from July 11th, from today. Russia interfering in 2024 election to help Trump. U.S. intelligence say. It's not a joke. This is not an old post. That's from July 11th, 2024. It's my honest opinion here, as you probably do, as you're always here for. This is tired. This is lazy. And what does this amount to? People supporting Donald Trump. I mean, I could be wrong, of course, but I mean, my God, they're just lazily dumping out all the things that are proven to be false. And let's put it this way too, just because it was before doesn't mean maybe now it's not happening, but this is being objective. The evidence does not seem to be there. What this will amount to is people that are unwilling to just blind themselves to logic and facts because they hate Trump, whether left or right, are going to go, well, that's a lie. So subtle movements to drive you to maybe support Donald Trump against your party stance. And Ali Abunimah from Electronic Intifada highlights something on the other side of the paradigm, which I think is hilarious, which just shows you yet again that none of this is even genuine. Is that you now have people like Ilhan Omar and AOC who have been screaming, rightfully so, about the fact that Israel's committing a genocide and that their government is supporting it, right? That's paramount. They can't stop telling you how this is the most important thing, except, oh, now we support Joe Biden because he's the best president of our lifetime. That's not a joke. Try to reconcile those two things. You're telling us he's supporting a genocide, but yet he's the best president of our lifetime and we're going to endorse him for 2024. But Joe, you're killing people. Yeah, they clearly mean that, don't they? As he writes, I don't understand, and I won't forgive it. Neither Ilhan Omar nor AOC, Ali highlights, can call themselves anti-genocide while supporting the main perpetrator of this genocide, Joe Biden. It's exactly like claiming you oppose the mass murder of Jews while saying Hitler was the best leader of Germany. Right? It's just pretty ridiculous. And Aaron Mate was the quote tweet he was quoting. He's been the best president of our lifetime. We have his back, they say. He says, I understand that anti-genocide Congress members are feeling vulnerable against AIPAC. I also assume they see Biden's vulnerability as an opportunity for a progressive agenda. But do they need to heap such praise on a genocidal president? I mean, there's no way to see that. They either don't care about anything they're saying or they're willing to compromise on stopping a genocide to benefit themselves. That's disgusting. It doesn't matter how you swing it. These are disgusting, dishonest people. Now, keeping that in mind around how this is used, I wanted to make sure we saw the overlap to the UK and make sure you watch this show if you haven't. I quite frankly think this is undeniable. And I want to make this clear again. Now, this is the show from July 9th, 2024. The SAVE Act, Real ID, and ID 2020, using the two-party illusion and the election to usher in digital IDs. Now, I want to make this very clear because, again, as I said to open, I feel like some people might have misinterpreted what I was saying, even though I kind of feel like I was very clear about it. I support the general premise of the SAVE Act. It's very obvious. As I said in the beginning, I don't even see how people could make an argument for why you wouldn't want that unless you're just arguing that we should change the law or the current reality of who can vote. And feel free to make those arguments. It shouldn't be traitorous to argue you have a different opinion about where this should go. But I also feel very, very strongly that this is being used as a Trojan horse, which, as most important and popular ideas often are, right? Like that they try to jump on or hijack a popular, real movement around something we care about for their own interests. I mean, that's usually what has the best effect. And they're doing this to drive in my opinion, digital IDs using Republican support. And this is what's interesting. The very group that a short time ago was the most resistant within the paradigm to digital IDs, right? So I guarantee you're going to have a different opinion over the things that have changed from some of the people inside the left part of the paradigm, but most of them probably still generally support it for the idea of immunity passports and vaccine passport, whatever in their mind that because most of them did during the COVID-19 conversation within the paradigm, not just all liberals and conservatives, but in the case of the paradigm. So now you're using this to drive Republicans to support, without them even knowing it, in my opinion, digital ID and setting up the drive to do so. And then all of a sudden, when that becomes a surface level conversation, you have a lot of people on both sides supporting it. That's how this is supposed to work. I just hope that's very clear. So getting into first what Denis de Bernardi pointed out, he simply said, reminder, the people are for the people that are for digital IDs are masquerading as voter ID fought against digital ID, masquerading as vax passports, right? So at this point, it's saying, remember, the people who are against voter ID want you to show vaccine papers. If you're all, and look, that's not necessarily incorrect, but if you're only ever looking at this from a two-party paradigm perspective, you're going to miss the bigger picture, which is what he's highlighting. The people that were fight the people that are for digital IDs masquerading as voter ID fought against digital IDs masquerading as vax passports. The point is that people are fighting against digital IDs can recognize both angles of this and still obviously recognize that there are people that are being contradictory and hypocritical from both sides of this around either angle of this. But if we cannot stand back and recognize that it is clearly part of this is digital IDs, even though I think it's self-apparent, self-evident, then you just are choosing to ignore something you momentarily cared about because of a partisan perspective. Now here is a clip. Alan D. Miller, I'm not familiar with, he posted this. He says, as David Blunkett insists, we have digital IDs for all. We need to be resolute together. This is in the UK. Concerns are privacy, debanking, deplatforming, and social credit systems style controls are huge. He says, don't fall for this. Trying to, kind of drive you into it. Now, this is from the UK, so it's not the same thing as the SAVE Act. Listen to what he has to say.
It's really important that we understand that the question of digital IDs that are mandatory is like a principle on everything on free speech. We either have free speech or we don't. We don't start saying, oh, if you have free speech for these people, then we can curb it because we don't like it. The fact that immigration now is being used as the attempt to bring in digital ID mandatory for everyone should remind us that it's a principle that we need to be concerned about, that the state having programmable central bank digital currency and be able to deplatform or debank people like we've seen already happen with private institutions as a consequence of their EDI and ESG rules and directives should be chilling to the bone to everyone. We should not have mandatory digital ID, not because of immigration or any other issue. There's plenty of ways to deal with things, a robust Home Office, an attempt to make sure that civil servants and all others do their jobs properly, a recognition that you've got the citizens on board with your whole approach, and a wider policy about what we're doing across the UK where the citizens are engaged with that, like banning certain marches and actual speech. It's the regressive way of dealing with things. So that's why we're here all to discuss about digital ID and remind everyone that, around these key issues, we shouldn't go along with it.
All right. So in case you missed it, I'll show you here. In the UK, they're using the idea of immigration to justify why digital IDs are necessary, if not mandatory. It's the same thing. And realize even before the SAVE Act, this was already pushed more than once, floated with different, and from both sides of the paradigm, guys, the idea of the border wall, the biometric aspect of it. This was one of the things already proposed from the Republican side, that we need some kind of biometric scans or some kind of ID system, digital, for immigration, because we need to make sure it's already proposed. From the left, you've had this proposed for many different things. Vaccine passport, and it's the same conversation. And now, in a very surreptitious way, as we just showed you in the previous show, they have Real ID Act compliant IDs as the central aspect of what you need to do. And I showed you in there's passport aspects of it, but remember, half the country doesn't have these, and the rest of them seem almost unlikely to be what most people have. And any case, my point is that once this gets pushed further, which is inevitable, they're all telling you that, and this gets passed, and a year later they just say, well, now they're only accepting digital passports and digital. Well, suddenly that gets amended. We can't do that because nobody accepts anymore. Then, without knowing it, you voted in the SAVE Act under a guise of immigration, when all you did was solidify. And even then, maybe you agree with what the premise of it within the bill, and so you still agree with that being passed, but they shoehorned in an act that was the real reason for it all, which was about making sure you had to be Real ID compliant. I mean, it's a no-brainer, guys, and I think it's very clear. Now, again, in case you missed the opening part, I agree with the premise of the SAVE Act. I think what's happening here is a surreptitious act to trick you into supporting something that they know you don't. Now, here in the UK, it says, this is from the 8th of July, UK's new government expresses openness to digital IDs, not cards. Britain's former Prime Minister Blair is touting digital identity as a solution to controlling irregular migration. One of the key issues during the UK parliamentary elections, which concluded July 4th. Interesting timing. In an opinion piece addressed to the newly elected Prime Minister, Blair says the UK government should harness the power of artificial intelligence to create a plan to control immigration. It's exactly the same thing. I really hope we can start to see this. Now, lastly, in regard to this act, Nick Sorter who I made a point about during the Maui conversation, who was legitimately caught for taking lots of money from donors, and then going there and staying in fancy hotels and so on. It didn't get a lot of attention, but I've had a certain opinion about this person for a while. It says the U.S. has passed the SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship to vote. He says this is a no-brainer. However, practically every single Democrat voted against this measure, as if they want illegals to vote. It certainly could be. But you see how they're just jamming you in? Like there's no air in the room for any other possibility. Very objective journalism, right? It's a no-brainer. Okay, well, it would be a no-brainer if it was a one-sentence line that said U.S. citizen, whatever. My point was there's other ways that you could verify this stuff without forcing people into real ID-compliant identification, which will drive you to digital IDs. It's part of ID 2020. It's on the surface. Watch the last show. So is it a no-brainer, or is he just missing part of the story? Or does he see that part and doesn't care because he's pushing a political agenda? I don't know. But if you think it's a no-brainer, then all you're doing is looking at what the government, either side of it, are presenting to you as the only things you should look at. If anybody out there you're looking to is only presenting what the narrative is from the government, I kind of think that's going to lead you in the wrong direction. What do you think? As I simply said, no-brainer should be the name of your podcast. We should ensure only citizens are voting, in case some people would jump to conclusions. But if you can't see the Trojan horse here, you don't care to. I think that's pretty clear. And all right, these are people that were speaking out against digital IDs and great reset conversations. But now suddenly, some no-brainer. You can't even look, can't even see. Now, overlapping this with Twitter, which I can't remember, the whole point is it's the same drive, the same authentics, Israeli overlapped digital identification conversation, which then they moved to Stripe, which I think is at least it's not an Israel overlap, but clearly there's still a problem there. It's all about identification, verification. It's the same conversation here. Now, the right has been talking about how Twitter has been saving them from the censorship of the left, and it's all these binary dynamics. Well, here's the quartering. A pretty open supporter of Elon Musk for the most part and what they're doing. On July 7th, says, here's X, Twitter, announcing that they're rejoining the World Economic Forum's flagship product. In case you missed this, July 1st. They will never be a free speech platform. Pretty scathing. This is from X. We're excited to announce that X has reinstated our relationship with this is from WFA, the WFA marketers, Global Alliance for Responsible Media. Whenever you hear something like that, I mean, look, all these people that are mostly Republican or supporting this Elon saving free speech narrative are a lot of the ones that are screaming about how globalism is the only problem. Clearly, we should care about the direction of the World Economic Forum and WHO, the New World Order conversation, globalism in general. These are problems that TLAV has been talking about long before they were screeching about only China being the problem. The point is that they're the ones that would ignore this because they're supporting Twitter, and as there's free speech, we make money on Twitter. The Global Alliance for Responsible Media, yeah, that's Orwell. It's like the same thing we see in every other context. The global fight against free speech, or rather hate speech, or whatever. The point is, as of today, X is included as a member of GARM, which is the hashtag for, here, look at this real quick. GARM members. And that's just what this is called. I forget what it stands for, about GARM. The global, that's what it was. I thought so. I don't want to jump this. A Global Alliance for Responsible Media. So that was the full name of it. And you can see here, membership of GARM is open to advertisers, ad tech partners, media agencies, media platforms, industry. So all they're doing is signing on to an agreement with the World Economic Forum partner to enforce what they think is responsible media. That's what this is. And so now they're aligning themselves again. And you know why they stopped? Because it was called out as a reason for censoring only Republican media. It says, X is committed to the safety of our global town square. And nobody should be treating it like that, guys. This is a problem for re-engineering how we look to this one spot. James Corbett was just talking about with Jimmy Dore. And proud to be part of the GARM community. I mean, look down here, guys. Everybody. The News Guard is one of the groups I was kind of referencing right there. These, Orwellian global and News Guard enforcing the government, and all they do is censor truthful information half the time, or, usually censoring, truthful information in the interest of what their agenda is. And maybe they don't even know it. I frankly think that they do. The quoting on the 10th follows up and says, hey, Elon, Linda Yaccarino, Why would the free speech platform, which it's not, never has been, just 7 days ago announce they have rejoined this cult? Look at the article. GARM exposed. And this is the Daily Wire, guys. You're going to have, how much you want to bet you're not going to see them call this out in regard to Twitter? Maybe, but I find it hard to believe. House Judiciary report says ad coalition likely broke law to silence conservatives. Okay, so how do you make sense of this, guys? People are going to blind themselves. La, 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 I don't want to hear it because they're supporting Elon when Republicans fighting against the bad Democrats say free speech, right? It's always more. That's rarely, if ever, what's actually happening. More than that, but same point here. Here's Elon Musk on the 11th. Vigilant Fox posting that Ben Shapiro tears into censorship cartel in fiery testimony. If you listen to it, it's just the Democrats and left-leaning things. It's all about censoring Republicans for free speech. Like, it's just so embarrassing how you can't acknowledge. I mean, what about Israel censoring people in Israel right now, or Palestinians, or even Israelis speaking out? You won't hear that from them because only, it's about. I personally think at this point, with everything that's happened, that this is a deliberate intention to drive you into either something that benefits them or for some other agenda they're a part of. They're willfully ignoring that's not just one side of the paradigm being censored. Or how about the fact that it's people like us that are not in either side of the illusory paradigm? But according to him, we've all fought against the Democrats. It's just this childish game where you're only fighting against the other half of your government. It's like, I don't even feel like I need to explain it anymore. It's just so embarrassing. And Elon Musk says, having seen the evidence unearthed today by Congress, X has no choice but to file suit against the perpetrators and collaborators in this advertising boycott racket. Aside from aligning yourself again with the group that they also highlighted was responsible for doing that, though, right? We're fighting them, but let's make deals together. Hopefully, some states will consider criminal prosecution. And whatever your opinion about some of the comments down below, I'm not saying I endorse everything that they're saying, but I want to highlight what some of the people that have been calling this out or otherwise supporting Elon in the past are saying. And this is the same thing, announcing that you're working with GARM again. This person says this is a kosher theater. Jews are talking about the harm that Jews will be causing while Elon reinstates his relationship with GARM. Now, you can hear that as Zionism or not. I'm not sure what their opinion is, but it's not just Jewish people, so I disagree with the framing. But I do agree with the idea that you're talking about this illusory concept of, while you're aligning yourself with the group that's fighting the censorship, when in reality, you're a part of it. This person says, so why is X a partner with GARM, which includes the ADL? You see where the direction is going. Bad Kitty says that's going to have to be some pretty large lawsuits. They did a lot of damage. Now, who at X did this? No, I just really can't stand this game where it's somehow like everything bad that happens. It's a very Trump concept. Everything bad that happens, somehow Elon wasn't involved. Who did this? Because it couldn't have been him. That's a very naive and self-serving opinion to be like, it can't be Elon because he's saving free speech, except that's really not what's happening. They're all involved, guys. I guarantee you they know what's going on. The quartering on yesterday says, it appears to me that Elon Musk is unaware that Linda has rejoined the flagship censorship product. How in the world do you come to that conclusion? He sees this. It's been posted. Are you really going to pretend that this was an accident? Now, even if it goes back, which will probably then to them solidify that it was a trick and Elon didn't see it. It's just like the Authentics. He is involved in these decision-making processes. And the point is that they pulled back because they recognized that you saw through it. That's also my opinion. But I think the evidence and the facts point far more to that than the assumption that he's somehow not involved in this. I don't think he's not involved in anything that he takes part in. But it says the GARM product, which controls 90% of the online spend, that Ben Shapiro was on Capitol Hill speaking about. So here's Ben Shapiro screaming about how they're censoring only Republicans. And then you got the Republican platform saving free speech, aligning themselves with that very same group. These people are either that bad at their jobs or are lying to you. And it says in following replies, I will show him they never even left. So now the quartering is saying the GARM overlap never even stopped being there. That has to show you everything. If you never broke off the relationship with that group, then you were lying about stopping that censorship. He says, here are two alternatives. Either X never left GARM or GARM overrepresents its membership and retains the listing of organizations that have left it on its website after those organizations leave. And you can find it that they're clearly at least posted as still being overlapped. Now, the quartering also highlights, this is interesting to me, It says the original creator of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, has abandoned their new blue sky platform, I guess, and have endorsed Twitter as the freedom technology. He calls Elon Musk X freedom technology. Right, because the Jack Dorsey character, who's clearly on the side of freedom and free speech, is now suddenly endorsing the free speech platform. All makes sense, right? Or none of them are on your side, because clearly Jack Dorsey is not on the side of freedom. But, let's just ignore all that, because suddenly they see the light. That's the easy thing to do, whether it's left or right, is that if they suddenly align with you, even if it doesn't make sense, you go, they just now see through it. We're suddenly on the side of the left or the right because we see the lies of the other side. Self-serving, personal lies to yourself. And as we're seeing them continue to censor and aligning themselves with the same thing, recognize the one thing that they're censoring without question. As Khaleesi highlights, free speech much? Flatten Gaza, nuke Gaza, delete Gaza, make a parking lot. He says, I sleep. That's Elon Musk for the podcast. Then over here, from the river to the sea, Palestine will free. Oh, censor. That's what we're seeing. It's ridiculous because we've shown you a lot of very overt, and I will point out they did bring back Lucas Gage. Again, I think it's simply because there was enough pushback that it was not worth it. Either way, they're not censoring the James Woods of the world, which I'm not calling for them to. I think that's free speech. My point is, those are people out there saying, kill them all. Overt things like Eli David and Elon Levy explicitly calling for killing. Doesn't matter. Now, before we get back into the Israel conversation, there's a few things I wanted to get into around medical freedom and specifically the RSV shot, which I'm really concerned about because, I'm concerned about all this stuff, which quite frankly, I think most of the world is at this point. But we're talking about a monoclonal antibody, which I wish that I had a whole thing lined up a while back. And I think what happened was there was one of those times where I lost a bunch of information for any number of reasons. And I decided not to go back to it. But I had a whole thing lined up for why monoclonal antibodies in itself, there was a problem there with the way this was progressing. In any case, the point is that I think we need to, for those of you that haven't yet come to this conclusion, recognize this is not a one-off. I mean that in the sense of what they're doing. That's even not clear. Not the agenda is not going to come again. I mean that the idea of the entire medical establishment and the products they're making. It goes back to the intent point. If we're seeing this is happening kind of in a ubiquitous fashion, regardless of the product, regardless of the location, we're in a really bad way here where this is sort of a fast and loose operation, it seems, for any number of illegitimate reasons around profit, around control, around whatever else. Get into the scary parts of this. What else, what other agendas may be happening around what they're doing with your medical aspects. My point in highlighting this is not about injections, not even around COVID-19. This is an RSV monoclonal antibody that killed 12 people in the trial, which we already highlighted before, and 2 children within hours, one of them immediately. And guess what? It's being given to people right this moment. If there was ever a part of you that thought there was some kind of protection aspect to this, where they were actually enforcing any level of protection they claim they are, this should remove that from your mind. The game before where they had a few reported deaths and they pulled the swine flu vaccine, and then you find yourself in COVID where you've got overwhelmingly reported deaths in the thousands, hundreds of thousands on the same system, and they just go, we don't care. It wasn't even done right. The point is they have not gone back from that. We're going forward the wrong direction with platforms, no more safety trials, lack of concern, no informed consent in certain concepts, contexts. Every single one of these tenets we always argued was why the system is good, have been removed, broken, lied about. We're in a position now where nobody seems to care. They're sprinting in the direction of, regardless of what happens, keep going. Here's your narrative. It's pretty terrifying, which then makes you, especially from my perspective, I'll just speak for myself, it makes me worried to do anything, even things that I would argue you shouldn't be resistant to, just anything. Like I don't know whether I would even want to go to the hospital for something serious at this point, which I'm not saying you should do. I'm not advocating for you to just ignore what you my point would be if a broken bone, it's going to be hard not to go to the hospital. But I'll tell you right now, I am going to worry about that. I just don't trust anything that's going on right now. And it's not because I'm a conspiracy theorist. We have every right in the world to worry that these people don't care about your health when it comes to an overlapping agenda or at all, for that matter. Plenty of very intelligent, very highly respected doctors and scientists have been screaming about this and still are to this very moment. And I'll show you some of them. Before we get to that, here's Josh Walkos highlighting this article from Children's Health Defense. He says, imagine taking your 27-day-old baby to the doctor, and they talk you into giving him a new RSV, in quote, vaccine, because that's not what it is. by Pfizer called Abrysvio, or I think it's Nabiriv or something like that. It's the product name and then the clinical name, whatever. I don't know why they do that. It says you then watch as he dies immediately after taking it right in front of your eyes in the doctor's office. That's what happened. 27 days old, received the vaccine at the office and passed away right there, right in front of them. How you ever deny something like that? See, the CHD obtained documents via FOIA request and published a piece on this death and as well as another infant girl. He says, for all the pharma shills out there who can't believe their Lord and Savior science would be responsible for this and think Bayers is somehow fake, here's a thread down below. Now, I wouldn't frame it as science because it's not about science. It is static. I shouldn't say it like that. It is something that it's not the people that abuse this. This shouldn't be any kind of slight against science. Science correctly is an ongoing, always evolving research dynamic where you're constantly looking at new things, you're testing things, you're questioning your beliefs. That's clearly not what they're doing. They're not practicing science. So I caution against the framing of, that science is the problem. That's the overreaction kind of mindset. And that's not what I'm saying. Josh is saying either. He's just kind of making a cheeky point about how these people are just blind to the reality. And check out the thread. Now, the point in this article is very clear. This is from the Defender. I don't want that to go away. That's so irritating. For the podcast, just that drop down thing doesn't want to go up, but it says exclusive, 2 infants die within hours. Pardon me. One right away, one I think within 7 hours. And they have the documents. You can look for yourself. They're from CDC. Now it says in the clinical trial for the drug, 12 infants died, which I already covered. A lot of people did. How is that not enough? We're in this game where they always argue, well, RSV can be super dangerous. So we go, well, that's dangerous, but it's more important to have the shot. Let's just even say you agree with that broken logic. Couldn't you just go, well, let's make it better? Are you actually arguing that this is the best you can do? Shouldn't you just go, let's keep working on this until we get a result that shows that, well, no. The need is now. RSV's everywhere, but it's not, though. We need it because probably profit, control, whatever else is going on. The point is that's ludicrous. To have a trial where you show that many, and their argument was, well, we can't prove that it's related. Think about how dumb that is. And think about the concept of how many times we saw it during the COVID-19 lie. But the FDA spokesman told CNBC when the drug was approved, mind you, none of the deaths appeared to be related. Right, because that common to have 12 children, infants, all randomly die for no reason in the process of one trial, right? I'm willing to bet you outside of other vaccine trials, that's pretty unprecedented. It says after the CDC recommended the drug, it expanded the 2024 childhood vaccine schedule, the vaccine schedule, to include this. And this is the Vagabond, same as the other name we listed. They're just the 2 different names for it. The point, one, that after a trial with 12 infants dying, you immediately put it in the schedule, which then means that kids are going to be required to have it for school. And then you put it on the vaccine schedule, even though it's not a vaccine. And then you realize that because it's not a vaccine, they're not required to keep track of the problems in regard to the CDC. Sort of a perfect game, isn't it? I don't know, ask the FDA. It's not our thing. And what's the FDA do? Well, it's just this. These are captured agencies. They don't care about this, and that's becoming pretty apparent. And it says they recently approved this for pregnancy. Yeah, the thing that within its own study, you can show that they don't know how it affects pregnancy. Same thing. I already went over this, just like with the COVID shots. In there, it says we don't have the full information around whether it's safe in pregnancy or breastfeeding, but they always go, but it's so important because we know. Well, then why wouldn't you study whether it's dangerous in pregnancy if it's that important? Well, you know the answer to that because they'd probably find that it's not safe and then they couldn't offer it. Money. When the CDC expanded the 2024 vaccine schedule, it changed the description of the schedule. This is how this works. Sort of like changing gain of function to EPPP. They just go, well, we want to put this on there, so we'll just alter the definition of what it is. That seems honest, right? They changed the description of the schedule to vaccines and other immunizing agents. These people are straight up criminals, guys, before adding the RSV monoclonal antibodies to the list, which have killed people. I understand that's where we are. According to the internal emails obtained by Children's Health Defense, and reported by them to the advisory committee, the CDC doesn't monitor injuries from medications that are not vaccines. The FDA recommends those injuries be reported to MedWatch, the FDA's adverse event reporting system, so they can then abruptly disregard it, like all the rest of them. Well, we don't know, and it's only a warning system. Okay, so meanwhile, people are dying. CDC's like, it's not our job. FDA says, okay, it's on this list over here. What's happening about it? Is anybody enforcing some kind of action? Clearly not. This is terrifying because of how completely incompetent this is, or willfully so. And that's my point about why I'm concerned about everything else. That's just logical, understand at this point, to see how dishonest, how willfully corrupt these people are with things that are killing infants. And yet, we're going to go in there and trust what else those people are they're telling you that you need because the CDC said so. That's what we're talking about. Now, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, which I showed you the last time we talked about this, was talking about this on August 7, 2023. In a different context, or rather different problem, same drug. Antibody-resistant mutations have already been documented within the RSVF protein, which is what's in this shot, after prophylactic administration of Nirsevimab. I'm sorry. Nirsevimab. Very strange name. That's the same thing we're talking about. It's an RSV monoclonal antibody. Cases of palivizumab resistant, I don't know what that is, sold under the brand name, it's another monoclonal antibody. So it's saying cases of this resistant RSV strains have been documented as early as 2010. The point being there, they already are aware of this problem. Now they're seeing the same problem in their new thing, which they're arguing it's creating and they've seen it can create antibody-resistant mutations. We already know what this is about. This is where you end up with the problem when there's any number of things this could lead to in regard to how your body reacts to that. Meaning autoimmunity, immune suppression, antibody-dependent enhancement, and many number of ways this can go. The point is that's not okay. That means, one, this is happening, and they've known it's happening, on top of 12 infants dying in the trial, and now 2 immediately afterward in real use. They've already known that there's all sorts of problems. You're telling me you can't take time? They don't care. When you see that it's been going on that long, there's something else going on. Now, in another conversation, in regard to just injections in general, Edward Dowd highlights the U.S. pandemic acute renal failure deaths and a preliminary analysis around this. Now, we, as many others, have talked about the idea of liver failure and so on, especially around the use of remdesivir. But he's simply highlighting that they found, even after removing COVID as a possible cause, multiple cause renal failure shows a strong signal of excess deaths beginning in 2021 with high statistically significant scores. Bottom line, something started happening with multiple cases of kidney failure beginning in 2021, accelerating into 2023. Well, gee, what happened in those timeframes? We all know. Excuse me. The point, so much information highlights an undeniable overlap to this. Excess death, myocarditis, blood clots, thrombocytopenia, thrombosis in general in multiple ways. Renal failure at this point is completely aligned with whether it's the injection itself, which I already showed you there is an overlap, or the mass administration of something that in their New England Journal of Medicine trial showed you 50% of people died from remdesivir. Here we are. And it's so transparent. And Brooke Jackson highlights, and just quoting, this is John Boudin, who I've referenced in the past, says, quote, "This is the worst in a century mass casualty event, and it seems to be caused by man, not by disease." Just wild. Now, John Boudin is the, what was it again? I believe he was a doctor, or I forget now. The point is not this. Yeah. God, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. In any case, somebody we follow in the past and involved in these conversations. The point is clearly, regardless of him, the point is the evidence, the information is overwhelming. And everyone's looking the other way in regard to people who might actually do something about this and still using most of this stuff. Here's Camus highlighting Dr. Bhakti. Again, I believe this is a newer clip. Regardless, he's made this point many times. And this is about the understanding, one, knowing that the animal trials that were pushed off, knowing, because, and I think it's very clear, because those are the trials where you would have found all of these problems. And then they did them after the fact, while they're being given to children at this point. And within that, they found exactly what we already knew, and exactly what we likely didn't want to see before it was given, which is that the mRNA, the lipid package, deliver. I mean, it's why we find this in every organ of autopsy people after these injections. It's why he said very clearly that all gene-based vaccines are dangerous, all of them. Here he is again, telling you what we should know by now. What they found in the mice in these trials should have stopped everything. Hey, look, Instagram censored our show today. Surprise, surprise.
The last point is, of course, this paper that appeared in Nature, I think 2 weeks ago, was it?
Peer-reviewed study.
Where the first detailed animal experiments were described, Nature, full article in Nature, that showed that these lipid nanoparticle packaged mRNA, mod RNA, would be unpredictably, uncontrollably taken up by myriad cells in the mice. This is the first experiment that was performed in animals to show the expression of the mRNA that was injected in lipid nanoparticles. 4 years after the vaccine had been injected into millions and millions of humans. And this proves that the humans were the object of experimentation. This will make those authorities liable.
A lot of what's happened makes them liable. Now, that's not to say that it's actually going to happen, but what he's saying in a legal sense, a lot of these points, the one he's making there in particular, means that they're liable for this. And yes, obviously, when you're given an experimental shot under emergency use authorization that is now shown undeniably to be killing, you're being experimented on. And I genuinely think that was the larger point of what happened. Who knows what the real outcome or what the focal point of that experiment was? I have plenty. I mean, I can prove to you there's plenty of overlaps to what they clearly did and make use of. Who's to say what the real design was? I think it's obvious, though, that this was an experiment. As we just talked with Brad Miller about this, he's of the same. He's openly calling it an operation, which I completely agree with. I think it's obvious this was Operation Warp Speed. Donald Trump into Biden was a clear tag team, two-party illusion agenda to experiment on the human population. Now, you could argue that it was somehow meant to be only the United States and it somehow became global. Either way, I think what it really shows you is that this is not just about one country. None of it is. Not our politics. We are being guided by something that's not about internal U.S. interest or other countries in the same way. My opinion, but I think the evidence is there. Now, Aaron Siri, in a different point, highlights a larger discussion about, we've mentioned Stanley Plotkin in the past. I believe that was a Josh Balko's thread, which when I first highlighted that, I think Aaron Siri is one of the one really interviewing him and highlighting some of these interviews you've seen. Aaron Siri did an amazing job just breaking the legal side of this down and highlighting their obvious lies historically and right up to this day. And I think this is one of these guys they call like the godfather of vaccines. And he's this guy that has been on the record in the past admitting the experimentation on innocent people. Nothing happens, which is crazy. But here he highlights, this is posted as of recently, I think it is, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's July 10th. He says, Dr. Stanley Plotkin, the world's leading vaccinologist, and his disciples have just capitulated. After decades of claiming vaccine safety is robustly studied, they just admitted that it is not, neither before nor after licensure. But don't be fooled. Read his Substack and this long tweet for details. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says it is amazing that after decades of Plotkin and his vaccinologist disciples insisting vaccines are the most well-studied products on the planet, they just penned an article admitting precisely the opposite. Sort of like Fauci putting out the Cell article that admits the whole platform design failed, and yet they don't even take a step. They don't slow down. They speed up. There's a reason this happens, I think, whether it's some kind of a liability issue or some kind of confusion aspect, or I don't know. There's all sorts of arguments around why they need to kind of display the truth while they're lying to you. I don't know. But either way, it's unreal how clear this is. They admitted vaccines are not properly studied, neither pre-licensure nor after licensure. They admitted, for example, that, quote, pre-licensure clinical trials have limited sample sizes and follow-up durations, and that, quote, there are not resources earmarked for post-authorization safety studies. He says that is an incredible reversal. He says, let me provide context so nobody is fooled at what they're clearly up to. For decades, the medical community insisted vaccines are the most thoroughly studied product ever. Paul Offit, for example, I think we should be proud of vaccines as arguably the safest, best tested things we can put in our bodies. For decades, parents of vaccine-injured children, vaccine-injured adults, and other stakeholders contested these claims only to be shunned and attacked by the medical community. Now you can read the rest of it. The bottom line is, if these central players are admitting the opposite of what they've been arguing, what does that mean? There's plenty of things we could assume. And we should hypothesize about what that might be doing. But the main point to not miss is that they lied to you. Use that information in your decision-making process. But whether this is being divulged to drive you into a new paradigm, we always question it's never, in my opinion, because they just want you to know the truth. So ask why, but understand first and foremost that the entire establishment and a lot of people within the paradigm have lied to you about this. Now, Camus also highlights a great clip back and forth in the UK. I believe it's the UK, or was it Australia? The point, this was, I can't remember her name. In any case, I'll play the clip. The point is about this back and forth around the injections themselves and the current narrative that you're still seeing pushed around the official capacity is that it's kind of trying to set the table for, it didn't really go the way we wanted it to, but it did work though, which it didn't though, at all. This killed people. Far, 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 far more people than it helped, if anybody. I'm of the mind that I don't think this was helpful to anybody. The detriments were so self-evident, so overwhelmingly high, so many of them, that even if you think there was some kind of a positive reaction to this in regard to antibodies, it was so overwhelmingly overshadowed by all of the problems that it didn't matter. But on top of that, I don't even think that's what's happening. I don't think this was in any way effective to what they claim was there, if it was even there to begin with, which is also something we should be asking. The point is that this is the narrative they're putting out today.
Zionism is opposed to...
That's not the one. Pretty sure I downloaded that. Oh, maybe I forgot because it was longer. Hold on, let me grab this. That's strange. So, what you're going to hear is him essentially laying out the narrative that, it was, didn't work exactly the way that and also he doesn't say it didn't work the way that he said. He's kind of like that, well, we over-assumed what was supposed to happen. So again, sort of putting it on the population that you weren't really paying attention. And that, it didn't work exactly, it didn't stop everything, but it did reduce the transmission, which did help in the long run. I don't agree with any of that. In fact, especially when you understand that what the most important aspect of it was, this increased your risk of getting sick. It increased the spreading. It increased the change of this. Again, that's if it was even actually there. What I'm highlighting is the argument within their narrative, which is that there's peer-reviewed science that proves what I just said. Now, you could argue that that was part of this illusion around viruses not existing, and so maybe you're right. But I think that the point to make there for people listening that aren't even in that conversation yet is to realize that the peer-reviewed science they were screaming you should trust showed that what they were doing was wrong, and yet they did it anyway. So they were wrong at every possible angle, which is pretty interesting to think about. How in the world they thought, right? Again, I've always made the argument as well that, maybe there's a reason. Maybe that's intentional. As always, question everything.
Talk about the difference between the before and after the vaccine was developed and distributed. What did you see?
So one of the most important effects was really psychological. People felt like they had some degree of protection, some degree of control, which was
oh, good. So we just tricked you into thinking you were safe. That's
so different than the feelings of helplessness and despair that really dominated early on.
Well, where did those feelings of helplessness and despair come from? They didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's because you were screaming we were all going to die. And that wasn't true. Oops.
Of protection, some degree of control, which was so different than the feelings of helplessness and despair that really dominated early on. We know, and it's been said multiple times, the vaccine wasn't perfect. It didn't prevent every infection. It didn't prevent every death. But without it, things would have been immeasurably worse. And
I vehemently disagree. But how do you prove something like that? This is the same thing that Trump and the rest of them keep doing. Well, it would have been worse. It's the same stupid game with the shot with an individual, right? All my teeth fell out and I have no legs now, but hey, it would have been worse without the vaccine, right? How the hell do you know that? How can you possibly prove that? That's what they know. They're banking on this improvable reality that, well, it would have been worse without it. But again, the evidence, I think, clearly suggests the opposite in every possible way.
we all knew that.
And tell me what the science says about the efficacy of the COVID vaccine. I think maybe people wanted to hear that it would completely protect you. I know when I got COVID before the vaccine, I got COVID after the vaccine, I was never under any illusion that it was going to be 100% effective, but that.
Why? They all told you that. Every single one of them, including the Pfizer CEO himself, posted 100% effective. So I don't know why you wouldn't have been under the illusion if you're blindly trusting the government like the rest of you claim we should. But this is the reimagining of the narrative, right? We're reimagining the way it all happened so we don't get held accountable for our criminal activity.
It would help prevent contracting it, and then.
Oh, so I'm sorry. I feel like this is actually in the United States. I swore that I said the other day, I don't know every person in Congress. I don't care to, quite frankly, but I feel like I remember her from somewhere else. That's crazy. What is there somebody in Australia or UK politics that looks like her? Tell me in the chat.
If I did contract it, that the symptoms would be less. But tell me what what the science says about the efficacy.
Science, as you know, evolves. And what we know about.
Oh, it evolved. Really? Okay, wait a minute. I was under the impression that science was settled. So now it evolves. I get it. So science is settled when you like what's happening, but it evolves when you're in a bad position. I got it. Now it all makes sense.
Vaccines and what we know about the virus, and the virus itself has changed a great deal over the last 4 years. When the vaccine was first studied, when it was a perfect match to the virus that was circulating, it was 95% effective at preventing any infection.
Not true. That has been in every way, peer-reviewed science from multiple angles proven that was not the case. Not from the beginning, and it never was. There's no point in which this was having any strain, and this is on top of all the other problems we showed you. So even if it is a smaller percentage, that is wildly overshadowed by all the things that it's causing. But that was not true. Remember, even if you think that was an accurate percentage, which I'm saying it was not, that was relative risk reduction, not absolute. So it's not 95% effective. It was 0.08% different, or rather effective in the case that it was. That the difference between what they saw the effect of the shot versus not was a 95% difference. That's what's called relative risk reduction, not that it was 95% effective in absolute risk reduction. They're still playing this game. And there's been studies from the New England Journal of Medicine and others that highlight that very thing shouldn't be used. That we should only use absolute risk reduction because the other's confusing. They know that and they use it because it's confusing.
But that dropped the longer you were out from the vaccine and the more the virus changed over time. It is still highly effective if you get the updated vaccines that are a better but not perfect match for the.
Highly effective, he says, for a thing that's currently aimed at something that's not even happening, assuming you even think it's there at all. They're aiming at some old variant. They say, well, it still works. Well, it wasn't highly effective when you first made the thing. Now you're telling me that it's highly effective all this time later? It's just embarrassing. These people are that bad at this, or very dangerous people.
Current viruses at preventing severe disease and hospitalization. It does reduce your chances of getting infected, but it does not completely prevent it. And I think willfully people are saying stop transmission when it doesn't stop it entirely, but it does decrease it because people who are not infected cannot transmit.
That's not true. In fact, it's the opposite. It increases your risk of getting the illness. That's peer-reviewed science. But let's listen to the guys sitting in front of Congress who are all involved with lying to you, right? Around the board. Now, interestingly enough, Pfizer's chief scientist, Mikhail Dolston, is about to step down, which, it certainly could mean that they recognize that they're writing on the wall. I would argue that probably makes sense. that there are people involved with these things. He's a central player in the creation of this very injection, and that maybe they want, but they wouldn't remove themselves from accountability just because they removed themselves from the company, right? But either way, I think it is an indication that there's something shifting in the opinion around all this. Now, what's funny about this is that despite all the discussion and the changing narratives, they're going right back to the same thing. And just like he was saying right there, that, just get the new one, it's updated and you get the new shot. Well, as Josh also highlights, apparently your body is like a phone's operating system. Your immune system isn't enough. Boost it up. Getting an updated vaccine is like updating your iOS on your phone. Where have we heard that before? Oh, that's right, from Moderna. They know the page they've deleted, which you can't see anymore because it's no longer there, which highlights the fact that this is an operating system. Our broad potential of mRNA science. So all they're trying to do is redirect people to the idea that this is the only way it's ever been, right? No, vaccines don't solve anything. You just need to keep getting them, right? If you wait a week, it's going to be less than it was before. So keep boosting it. No, what they're highlighting is the fact that these things have destroyed your immune system. That's your immune system failing, not the other way around. There's a reason historically we used to always be clear that if you got chickenpox, you never got it again, or because you had immunity to it, you created antibodies which could defend against it. Same thing in any one of these concepts. And people, as we showed you with the science around this in the very beginning, peer-reviewed and otherwise, who got naturally ill from whatever's happening, were then protected from it. Broad, lasting, according to even the CDC, according to even Fauci. But no, we just ignore all that. We want you to get stuck in this operating system style where we pump out a new thing every 6 months, and every time you come in and you get the update, which becomes, what I argue what that is you needing whatever's in that shot to maintain whatever problem, to stave off any problem that's happening because you got those shots. In any case, it functions very much like an operating system on a computer. Plug and play interchangeably with new programs. And the program or app is your mRNA drug. Right, it just produces a new thing. What it's doing is training your body to produce new things. Now, how long until your body's being trained to produce all these different proteins before it just has a problem because of that? That's a whole other problem to think about, right? Because remember, this isn't a one-stop thing they pretend. Your body continues to make these things, as has been shown by dead bodies being autopsied. So you get this shot, you get the new RSV combination, you get the new ferritin nanoparticle thing for the flu, and you get all of a sudden your body, and realize the new flu shot they're highlighting has 20 different strains in there. 20. So now you're walking around, your body's pumping out all these random different proteins, your body's attacking itself. I can almost guarantee it. Here is the article from July 10th. And it says, Dr. Leong Ho Nam, an infectious disease specialist, sheds light on this perspective by comparing regular COVID-19 booster shots to updating your mobile phones. This is exactly what was the plan as we showed you before this ever started. Quote, keeping our vaccinations current is akin to updating your mobile phone's operating system regularly. Mind you, he did not say only COVID shots. He's now framing vaccinations as a general sense as updating your phone. We've never pretended that was the case before COVID-19. And you could argue they were always lying to you, and now we're just telling the truth. But even if you think that, recognize they were always lying to you. The reality is we're being lied to. And the game here is that now, because of whatever they did, or because they want this for revenue, recurring 6-month shots forever, either way you look at it, or some unknown factor, they're just pretending that now that's the way this is supposed to go, as opposed to getting your shot when you're a child and being protected against a thing forever, which is the way they always told you that was the case. Now it's a regular thing. Isn't that science? Don't we all know that? Anyone's conspiracy theorist says otherwise. It says, with each update, the body is better protected against other viruses and malware. With the same reasoning, you need to be updated with the latest vaccine. So you might see right there, he made it clear. He's generally pretending that that's what vaccination is. Maybe that's what they've made it now, but it's not what the idea of immunization is truly. It says the need for booster vaccines, particularly among the more vulnerable segments, the otherwise ones that are the most at risk from these dangerous shots. Interesting how that always works. Such as older adults and those with pre-existing conditions remain significant. Right, so if you look up anything historically, even during COVID-19, who were at the most risk of vaccines in general, or these shots in particular? Older adults, autoimmune issues, pre-existing conditions, and children, which is usually why they study them in these trials, or they omit them for certain reasons if it's not necessary for them to have them. Now what they're doing, as always, I pointed this out during COVID. How do you go from immunocompromised people should not get shots in general because it's dangerous for them, to they need it first because they're at most risk from COVID, which wasn't the truth, if it was even there. How does that even logically make sense? Because they're changing the paradigm. Now they need to be front in line, even though they're at most risk from all of these things. He explains that immunity by infection wanes with time in about 3 to 6 months. Immunity by infection. He's literally claiming that natural immunity wanes within 3 to 6 months. He's describing the ridiculous injection stuff that they give you. He's lying, or he's that bad at his job. A recent report from the United States CDC reveals the updated 2024 COVID shots released last September was 2023 to 2024, was about 54% effective. Yeah, that sounds great. Flip a coin. Flip a coin to see if you get the minor effect they claim is going to help you. You don't flip a coin to get all the side effects of the shot, which are obvious and rampant and everywhere. That's the whole pile of problems we always talk about, which are not slim and minor and insignificant. And even if they are individually, you pile them together and they're no longer slim and insignificant. So the point is, you're being forced to get something under the guise that it will help you because your whatever else immunity isn't present. That's a lie. And going here, take this thing that's 54% effective against something from a while ago. Because now we're dealing with something else. And they go on to say, remarkably, that efficacy just so happens to extend to the new thing we tell you is there. The JN1 variant, whatever that is. That, at least in January, because we're in July now, because we know how long that stays the same, don't we? It says, despite the vaccine being initially designed for XBB. So, okay, let's get this straight. The initially designed thing aimed at over here ended up not being aimed at the right thing all the way back in September, but it was still 54% effective at that time. Now they go all the way into July of 2024. It's still somehow the same. Even though historically our whole argument was the variants change everything. But now because we don't want to do that, we pretend that's not the case anymore. Do these people not realize that we're paying attention, that we can look at what they said, or that people like Walensky can lie and say that it's from this time frame, an unvaccinated pandemic, and then highlight that they were looking at data where there was no, I mean, these people are constantly lying about everything. How do we not distrust everything they're telling you? This is where it's going. So be on guard. Be aware that they're driving you into a new paradigm. And it is obvious. This is why I kind of think that they're not going to do the same thing again. It's over. It's actually kind of, it's powerful and it's positive, but it's pretty incredible to see how many people are uncomfortable with that field right now. And you know what's funny? Individually talking to people that may be on the left of the paradigm, you'll find it there too. They don't want to say it out loud, and you'll find it in certain contexts if you are, aligned politically or whatever else, but you'll hear it. They don't want these things anymore. They're not going to come out and say, you were right, Republicans. They'll never say that. Neither were the Republicans for the Democrats, but it's clear that everybody's very concerned about this. So what happens next? It's a crapshoot here. I think we're going to be tricked and lied to about damn near everything as always, but I think it's going to take a different form. So it's why it's important to be on guard. Now into the conversation of foreign policy. And pretty much everything I just said applies here too, right? We're always trying to manipulate you into something that benefits the empire. So here we are. Never before have seen such an obvious, overt, live stream genocide. Everyone knows it's happening. Everybody. Even the people lying about it. And yet it just keeps going. The ceasefire lies, the starvation campaigns, the famine ongoing, the continuous bombing of innocent people, the video after video of destroyed children's bodies across platforms, across pavement, everywhere. Not even trying to argue Hamas present or whatever. It doesn't even matter anymore. Because again, my point is, we all know they're lying. Everybody, everywhere knows they're lying. People just invested for one reason or another in that lie. So the point is, why even say it anymore? We all know that we don't believe you, or we're going to believe you either way. So they just bomb children and just keep going. And your governments around the world that are actively participating in that crime, while otherwise screaming that they care about human rights and press freedom and individual liberty, except ignoring all those things anytime it suits their interests. So here, let's start with a conversation about Zionism, because I still very clearly think that the evidence points to the fact that this is the central problem, not the only problem. And realize, again, Zionism is not a uniquely Jewish concept. In fact, it's a religious, if that's how you'd say that concept. In my opinion, it is clearly about manipulating anything to achieve its ends. As Ilan Pappé and plenty of others have highlighted, Christian Zionism was the original foundation for this. And the original Christian Zionists were the ones that chose to manipulate Jewish people into going to this location because they thought it would bring about the prophecy. And now you've got Jewish Zionists in the same way doing the same thing in reverse. But still, apparently, the numbers show that the majority of Zionists in the world are Christian. So it's not about one religion, one ethnicity. It's about Zionism manipulating people for its own ends. So here, listen to a Jewish rabbi telling you Zionism is a nationality, or excuse me, that Zionism is a nationalization of Jewish identity. It is not the same as Judaism. It is not some, this is a game being played. And it's just one of the most obvious things in this conversation. And I'm glad people are starting to call it out.
And never mind the fact that the Zionists violate the Jewish religion in all sorts of ways. The very definition of a Jew, according to Zionists, is different than the definition of a Jew according to Judaism. All Zionisms, instead of talking about the definition of Zionism, it's better to realize that every Zionism presupposes two things. Thing number one, the Jews are a nationality, not just a religion. Thing number two, Israel is the state of that nationality. What Japan is to the Japanese and France is to the French, Israel is to the Jews. Okay. And therefore, by the way, that's why Netanyahu and all of these guys say anti-Zionism has to be anti-Semitism. This is coming from Benjamin Netanyahu. You cannot say I'm against the existence of the United States of America, but I want an American identity. You can't say I'm against the existence of France and say I want a French identity. So too, you can't say I'm against the existence of Israel and want a Jewish identity. Without Israel, it's like French without France. It's like the Japanese without Japan. Now, the whole thing is baloney, because the Jews existed way before Israel did. We exist now independent of Israel. There is no connection between the existence of the Jews, the identity of the Jews, and the state of Israel. Yet, the state of Israel wants to own Jewish identity to the point where Japan is to the Japanese, what Israel is to the Jews. That's Zionism. It's the nationalization of Jewish identity.
And you know what's funny? I've already seen somebody clip out the first part to make it look like he wasn't saying what he was saying. Like, it's just, there's so much dishonesty going on. He's clearly outlining the way that they present this, and he's clearly telling you it's not reality, right? This Judaism is not the same as Zionism. Zionism is a political ideology that is using Judaism, as well as a lot of other things. Now, here underneath that post, George simply highlights this, which is, I've already talked about this very guy in this quote. It is very real. This is a Holocaust survivor saying, call Zionists what they are, Nazi criminals. His opinion, but very real. You just can't keep pretending this is about anti-Semitism. Here's another post. Uncaptured News highlights this. The policy change could end Zionism. And this is a change. And this is a very important point. The change is about the idea of saying it's for the state of the Jews alone, and simply going, let's just say it's the state for the Israelis alone. Why is that a problem? Isn't that the whole point? Well, no, because it's a great point. What it highlights is that it is only about Zionism. Because if you have to remove, if you can't only make it about Israelis, which is arguably what they claim is the same argument, then clearly it's about the idea that you're using the illusion of this overlap. And this Uncaptured News has done a great job in this. Now, this is the same rabbi who's openly telling you that this is an illusion.
You say Israel shouldn't exist, you're an anti-Semite. You're allowed to criticize Israel's policy. I answer these people, fine, no problem. Let Israel exist. I just want to change one policy. The policy is that Israel's the nation state of the Jews. Change that to the state of the Israelis. That's all. Change that policy. Well, what do you mean? If you do that, Israel doesn't exist anymore. So listen to what they did. They created a fake Jewish nationality. Then they created a country that's not really a country. It's a policy. They created a policy that if you disagree with the policy, you disagree with the existence of the country. If you change the policy, you destroy the country. It's all a fantasy from beginning to end. All of Zionism is a fantasy. I studied Zionism for all of my adult life and most of my adolescent life as well. This is the quickest way to dismantle Zionism. Israel is not really a country in the same sense that other countries are. It's just a policy. It's an ideology. Once you get rid of that ideology, Zionism disappears and Israel, it's not the Jewish state anymore. And then you have peace.
And this is why so many anti-Zionist Israelis and Jews are beat up and arrested by the Israeli government. Sort of like plenty of people speaking out against the war that don't want to join the IDF have been arrested. The point is that clearly it highlights that they use this to maintain the necessity for Zionism. It's why many might argue that some of the reason this might have been allowed to happen on October 7th, if you believe that, the evidence clearly suggests that something allowed that, just some element allowed what happened or ignored it, that you could argue is about creating the justification for why Zionism would be necessary. Look at all the hatred of Jews in the world. We need to exist, even though it's not really what's happening. Even though you can argue that they allowed the killing of Jewish people to justify the need to defend Jewish people. Historically, that's happened many times. Provably. Plenty of, like, Avi Shalom has highlighted examples in Iraq. It's undeniable, guys. It's time we should be honest about this stuff. Now, here is an interesting overlap. Khaleesi highlights this guy, Douglas Murray, who's been a shameless Zionist promoter during the genocide the entire time, speaking with another shameless Zionist promoter, Ben Shapiro, saying that the number of 15 million Jewish people would be a greater tragedy. The murder of 15 million Jewish people would be a greater tragedy than the murder of 15 million Christians, he says. Why? Because Western civilization would perish without Israel. Think about the hubris of that statement. Everybody else, the entirety of Western civilization would be gone because Israel wasn't there. You know, the group literally creating the instant destabilization of the Middle East. It says, quote, Western civilization could not survive the destruction of the Jewish state because it would be, among much else, the cutting away of the whole tree we're on, and Western civilization would die. These people are lunatics, man. I mean, my God, this is overwhelming. And the point is, just like the rabbi was telling you, this is the whole thing. This is why they're so desperately they need this hyperbolic framing is about the desperate need to maintain Zionism. The idea of the Jewish state, not the Israeli state. Because if you remove that framing, suddenly you don't need to have the game is about how Israel is somehow protecting all the Jewish people in the world and staving off the Islamic overtake. It's not what's happening. When you can see that there are massive groups around the world, and I think a growing potential, a growing number of Jewish people in the world in general are speaking out about Zionism, about what the state of Israel is. So how do you frame that? If this is all about protecting all of them, if they didn't exist, everything would be gone, then how does that make sense? Like Sam Husseini called out Matt Miller. Are you suggesting that Jews aren't safe in the United States right now? In fact, they're far safer everywhere else other than in Israel. This is a disgusting misrepresentation to justify their agenda. It says, could America survive if the Jewish people were no more on its watch? Or everybody was forcibly deported from the Holy Land? Come on, of course not, he says. Could America survive if the Jewish people were no more on its watch? What does that even mean? So to me, this feels like almost a threat, the idea that you won't exist if you don't make sure Israel exists. But in any case, the point is this is irrationally wrong. And here that I just showed you a Jewish rabbi highlighting exactly why they're wrong. But of course, as Ben Shapiro would call him trash because he disagrees with Zionism. Again, showing you that it's about Zionism and not Judaism. As Alan Mizrahi highlights this clip of Jordan Peterson of saying, this person shared it saying, Jordan Peterson, who seemingly has completely lost himself after what appears to be being influenced by Zionist ideology, tells Israeli Jews that the fate of the world depends on the decisions they make, and then cries as usual. So apparently only Jews are the ones guiding this direction. I mean, look, there's entire clips about rabbis making these statements, saying that we're the chosen people, nobody else is, and that's why you're all jealous of us. You could argue that's wrong, but whether or not you think it's wrong, the point is that's the stance is clearly, even if right, showing you that you're more important than everybody else, that other people's opinions and choices are less important than what you think. Not every Jew thinks that, but that's crazy. It doesn't matter what religion or ethnicity or political stance you are, or position you have, that's crazy. You're simply arguing that you're more important because God said. Let's have a conversation about that. Let's debate that. How does that happen? So the point is here, he's highlighting the same point, that Jews are the ones that decide where this future is going. I mean, there's people in the world that aren't even religious. So the bottom line is this is not something that should be endorsed by any objective journalist, or for that matter, anybody objective at all. Because frankly, I don't think this is the case. Are we going to pretend that the God that we all understand from a religious perspective only wants one group to be protected? Especially a group that's openly committing genocide, raping, murdering, pillaging. That sure lines up with our opinion of God, doesn't it? And as this person highlights down below, or where was there something? It doesn't matter. There's another clip down here I was going to highlight. Anyway, as Alan says, Israel is situated between Damascus and Cairo, two major cities that have had hugely important historical and cultural significance for millennia straight. A short drive from Israel's borders, Jericho in Palestine, Petra and Amman in Jordan, and Baabalek in Lebanon are 7,000 to 10,000 years old. or more. It have amazing sites and relics that tell the stories of ancient civilizations that predate any biblical event for thousands of years. This part of the world has been populated and has had culture, trade, cities, agriculture, art, what have you, for some of the longest periods documented on Earth. But for Jordan Peterson, coming from a colonial culture whose entire existence is shorter than that of the early dynastic period of Egypt, which is Israel he's talking about, that's before the Old Kingdom, he says, calls it a no man's land. You know, the old trope, the narrative that nobody there existed. They were all just a bunch of savages with nothing to do. It's just such a shameful lie. And he goes, where nothing exists or ever existed apart from Israel. This is an educated person who, before he was somehow overtaken by this, was one of the most seemingly like intellectually logical people that you can listen to. And here he is, just so you can't look this information up. You can't recognize that it's undeniably obvious that it wasn't some, a land with no people for a people out of land. It's ridiculous. He says, yesterday he made fun of other Judeo-Christian idiot Douglas Murray, who pleasured himself to fake historical fantasies, but they keep talking. The ignorant, shameless, blithering fools. So we need to keep putting the nonsense they spew in context to show just how laughable it is. Exactly. Now, in context, interesting time to add this with the claim that there's nobody there. Well, one of Jordan Peterson has seen these historical videos that prove that there was people there. Palestine in 1896, before Israeli occupation. It says, a Jewish man wearing a Turkish torbash, and although he prays in Hebrew, his everyday language is Arabic. Yeah, just try to make sense of that with the lies they're being told about how none of this existed before Israel made it happen.
15 years later, the cinema is taking its first steps. Cameramen employed by the Lumiere brothers filming at Jerusalem Station provide the first moving pictures taken in Palestine. From now on, the camera is a recording eye, and what it records is this: a society much like that of Cairo, Damascus, or Beirut, in an Arab city much like any other. By the end of the 19th century, Palestine has 500,000 inhabitants, of whom 30,000 live in Jerusalem. A veiled woman, a Sunni Muslim, one of the majority. An Orthodox Jew. He too turns away from the camera. Here we have an Armenian Pope. Each of the Christian denominations has its church here in the Holy City. The holy places of the three religions are scattered across a few hundred square meters. The Great Mosque is close to Christ's tomb. Further along at the foot of the Wailing Wall, a Jew is reciting a prayer. He is wearing a Turkish tabush, and though he prays in Hebrew, his everyday language is Arabic. Jews form half the population of Jerusalem, but in the country as a whole, they make up less than 5% of the total. Christians account for 10% and Muslims 85%. All of them are subjects of the Sultan of Constantinople. There are no frontiers in the Ottoman Empire. There are administrative divisions in which, in this immense territory, Palestine occupies a mere 27,000 square kilometers, made up of 3 small districts in the south of the province of Damascus. The same empire in the 17th century. In the meantime, it has lost the Balkans, France and Italy have seized North Africa. England has moved into Egypt, Aden, and even Kuwait.
So, the point is, Israel moved into, or rather, Zionist, under the allowance of Britain, chose to take some of that territory for their own fascist agenda. All on the record. Balfour Declaration. I mean, this stuff is historically easy to prove. The point simply is that was obviously not a land with no people, guys. It's absurdly dishonest. Everyone knows that. Anybody that cares to look. And so now the whole point is, as even Jewish rabbis are trying to tell you, Zionism is a toxic ideology that is ruining society, that is actively pitting people against each other and letting people suffer who they claim they're protecting. And now they're trying to conflate these things, which is one of the larger points happening in regard to at least Facebook and other platforms. I mean, Twitter is actively censoring stuff around this very topic. Caitlin Johnstone found out that it's not even just about the word Zionist, which actually I'll show you this first. So this is Dan Cohen highlights Zionism as a political ideology, Judaism as a religion. By conflating the two, Facebook accepts the falsehood that Zionism equals Judaism, which only Zionists and anti-Semites believe, which is the whole point I keep making. Only racists and Zionists believe these things. Under the guise of fighting anti-Semitism, Meta is exacerbating it. No to censorship, no to Zionism. I agree. And here's the World Jewish Congress saying, breaking, Facebook will ban the use of the term Zionist as an anti-Semitic proxy for Jews. So think about how dumb that is. That's like saying the Republican is a synonymous term for white supremacist. And then suddenly you're not allowed to say Republican on social media because that means you're claiming they're racist or something like that. So the point is, how then do you talk about other things around that discussion? What happens if a Zionist murders somebody who's also a Jew? Can I not talk about Zionists? Can I not say that Zionist just killed somebody? Oh, you're racist. Guys, it's so transparently dishonest. They're being pressured to do this because of Zionism. This whole game they play about how that's not obvious, or by saying the Zionist interests are clearly infiltrating, controlling the outcome of policy or platforms, is not about Jews controlling the world. It's about anybody who's a Zionist in some ways controlling policy and outcomes of platforms. They're Christians, they're Jews, they're neither of either. The point is clearly by conflating it with a racist idea, the truth, mind you, suddenly you're not allowed to point out the truth. And they'll still, no matter how clearly I explain it, argue that I'm somehow wink, wink, only talking about Jewish people because that's the only way they can make this work. Like the rabbi was highlighting, if you remove that game, the lie goes away. Now here, Caitlin Johnstone posted on Facebook. Didn't even use the word Zionist. So this shows you that it's not just, it's about using all of this to censor anything that goes against the Zionist agenda. This just couldn't be more clear. Check this out. She posted, excerpt from the nonstop news stories proving Palestine supporters right about everything. Haaretz has a new report out showing the IDF has seized more than a quarter of Gaza's territory. Now, this is another tweet she made the same. So essentially saying that Haaretz, an Israeli platform, has shown that Palestinians were right about something is apparently racist now. How do you even make sense of that? This is an Israeli newspaper. But guess what they said? Or where was it? The goes against, it's a community standard. Of course, they called it spam. What else are they going to do? It can't claim it's racist, can you? These people are so desperately dishonest, and it's so very transparent. I mean, who uses Facebook anymore? Anyway, these people are ridiculous. Rich People Weekly highlights one of the points around this, where in their discussion, they claim that one of the things they're stopping, it says the amendment to Meta's policy means that posts with the term Zionist will be removed when they're found to invoke harmful anti-Semitic stereotypes, such as Jewish control of institutions. Okay, so we're not talking about that. We're talking about Zionists. And if I say Zionists are influencing a platform, you're going to go, oh, he means Jew. No, I don't. But that's what they're doing to conflate that and hide it, dehumanize Jewish people. Same point. I guarantee there are some people out there that are making that conflation. The point is you can get to be the one that decides what I think when I'm saying that. And it says, call for harm towards Jews. How exactly is that even making sense? So, again, it's the same point. If I'm saying Zionists should be arrested, they're going to say you're asking for Jews to be arrested? Well, that doesn't even make sense. But they're going to claim you're trying to harm Jews. Or the point that Rich People Weekly is making, deny the existence of Zionists? Like, I don't even think they know what they're talking about anymore. Because that shows the lie. If the whole point is we're using Zionists to conflate, to hide our hatred toward Jewish people, why would we then deny the existence of Zionists? That doesn't even make sense. I think what they're clumsily getting at is somehow denying the Holocaust. I mean, it's just lazy. And as he says, no one's trying to deny the existence of Zionists, only pointing out that it's supremacy ideology whose adherents have been committing some stage of ethnic cleansing since 1947. The whole point is that we're trying to highlight the existence of Zionists. You guys are completely ridiculous. Again, I think that they've lost the plot here. I think they're so desperate to hide this because of whoever's influencing this discussion that that's the best they can do. Now, let's talk about, we're going to talk about the Lancet and the overwhelming, the fact that so many people are dying, which is really one of the hardest parts for me in this entire conversation. but the idea of how this is misrepresented. This is the picture I used today for the show. And it's just such a great, it embodies the entire thing. As Tiberius highlighted, the little girl throwing stones to defend her family home is the terrorist. The occupation soldier born in the United States is the victim. Surely it's obvious. Or are you some kind of anti-Semite? That's what the world is doing right now, right? She's the evil terrorist. The guy with his rifle trained on a child is the good guy. Pretty clear, huh? Well, here's General Wesley Clark, or I believe just Wesley Clark at this point, who's the Atlantic Council board director. Nothing shocking there. Literally makes the argument that, as they frame it, there's virtue to shooting kids that throw rocks. It's not exactly what he says, but he does say there's a virtue to taking action against those rising up before it gets too violent. But he uses the precursor, the reference to say that, well, a child throws a rock, you don't shoot him, and then, well, they get worse from there. There's really no way to misunderstand what he's highlighting here. And I don't know if maybe he didn't mean it this way and he accidentally, it doesn't matter. What he's making the case for is that you need to deal with those kids throwing rocks before they become kids throwing something harder or using something worse, which is not necessarily what happens outside of you manufacturing the necessity for them to fight back, legal resistance. So they look anywhere within a controlled area to be able to do whatever they can to fight back. Now, yes, surely some of them just are bad people. Those people exist everywhere in the world. But the logic of saying we have to start dealing or shooting children that throw rocks, as both Trump and Netanyahu have said they should be doing, that it's only going to get worse according to the rules-based international order.
We went into Afghanistan. We went into Bosnia. Every time you go in at first, there's no reaction. Then there.
Yeah, the illegal invasions and occupations. Yeah, gee, I wondered why they react.
There's a kid that throws a rock. Okay, you didn't shoot the kid. Okay, we can throw rocks. And then it goes up and up and up, and they look for the hole. So there is a virtue in saying, if you come after us, it'll be the last thing you do.
Wow.
You cannot, there are certain lines between diplomacy and the military that have to be made clear.
Right. So we're speaking absolute terms here, right? It doesn't matter whether we're there legally or whether we're actually fighting for your country or we just want to steal your resources. You can't do anything because if you throw rocks, then we're going to make sure that's not okay, right? We're talking about the U.S. empire. I hope we're at a point where we can be honest about the reality of what your government, if you're an American, mine included, has been responsible for. If there's any honesty in the world, in 100 years, people will be looking back at this being the central boogeyman of this time frame. The obvious, overt reality that these governments, U.S. leading the charge, has been doing the worst amount of terrorism that we've ever seen over and over and over, destroying countries, destabilizing people, stealing their resources, and a hell of a lot more dark around that. Sex trafficking. God, no, it's so much going on around this that it's clearly, undeniably tied back to the government. Remember Cynthia McKinney in Congress highlighting I think it was DynCorp involved with human trafficking, openly calling out the government at that time. It's just, and nothing happens. This is the reality of what this government is. So standing there, acting like it's virtuous to stop people pushing back, in this case, the legal resistance of Palestine, of Iraq, of Syria, of Afghanistan, of anywhere else that they are, without question, illegally occupying. But no, just kill them, because we're the good guy. Makes sense? Now, I wanted to make sure we highlighted this in regard to killing people, including their own people, in the case of the Hannibal Directive, because we just highlighted this before. Now, even Haaretz has come out and said, yes, they ordered the Hannibal Directive. Shouldn't be discussed, shouldn't be debated anymore. This is real. It happened. The question is how many they killed of their own people. But as Wyatt Reed highlights, 2 days ago, Israel's outlet Haaretz confirmed that they did use the Hannibal Directive. Since then, not a single mainstream outlet has reported on it. Now, that was on the 9th. It's likely that somebody has since then. The point being that this comes out and nothing. One of the largest developments from a leading Israeli platform that highlights the Israeli government ordered the killing of its own people. Nah, no big deal. Let's keep talking. Let's scream about the lies that Israel puts out about what they claim is happening. Or let's pull hair out about the arguments of what happened in Ukraine, even though that's clearly undefined. But we'll ignore the obvious because there's a controlled agenda. And that's why you don't hear about all the other things we're talking about, because the media has been co-opted by both the Israeli government and the US government and anybody else trying to control the outcome of what's going on. It's not up for debate. You can see that lobbying, as well as a completely dishonest and illicit action, is happening all over the place. To try to just jam that into you hate Jewish people, it's laughably absurd. It's childish. It's like highlighting the invasion of Iraq and saying you just hate Christians. It's like, well, hold on a second. There's clearly a huge problem there. Maybe I do too, but it's not the case. The point is that you can see the large event. You can see what they're all doing. You can see their bribery, their lies, their assassinations, and we're going to pretend you just hate one group of people? It should be insulting to you and Jewish people. Now, on that same note, as Kenneth Roth highlights, in regard to the Hannibal Directive, I mean, just simply highlighting the article, which I hope you should read for yourself, Dr. Strangelove highlights a point that I think I didn't really mention, which is really important to the larger discussion of not just that they ordered this, but that they actively tried to hide this and cover it up, which, if you remember, they tried to hide all the cars. Remember that? Where they not only moved them off the street because it showed you clearly like the string of dead cars leading to Gaza, they destroyed the evidence of their crime, citing, of course, religious reasons. Well, isn't that just on the nose? Exactly the point in every angle. Zionism using Judaism to hide what they are. They didn't want the world to know how many of the 1,200 Israelis were killed by Apache helicopters. So they manufactured reasons that you're not allowed to poke at to hide the crime and the evidence. That's Zionism for you. Now, in regard to evidence, let's talk about the death toll. The very death toll that should be more than enough for anybody anywhere, regardless of whether everything Israel ever said was true, should be enough for you to want this to stop. Should be enough for you to hold them accountable for their crimes. There is no way that this lands up. There is no way that the amount, even the 38,000 they're claiming of what they can prove, even that alone, tens of thousands of children, or over 10,000 of what they can confirm. Save Our Children says there's another 20,000 missing, detained, or under rubble right now. That should be enough. There is no narrative that makes that okay. The Lancet, I'm sure you've all seen, counting the dead in Gaza, difficult but essential. July 5th, the main point. Estimate is that up to 186,000 or even more could be attributed deaths to the current conflict in Gaza. And this is including everything. Being killed in bombing on apartment buildings, starvation, lack of water, disease, direct shooting from IDF, everything you can imagine. That is all. I'm going to play a video from Matt Gilbert in a second that shows you the great breakdown of this. It's undeniable. It's kind of a long video, but it's worth listening to. He says, using the article reports, using the 2022 Gaza Strip population estimate of 2,375,259, this would translate to 7.9% of the population of Gaza. There are people doing, overlaps to that and showing that would represent like 2.9 million people in our country, something like that. The point is, it's overwhelming. The amount of people, almost 8% of the entire population being killed. There's no way you pretend that's pinpoint targeting, only Hamas. I mean, this is exactly what it looks like. It's the wiping out of the entire civilization. It says the interim measures set out by the International Court of Justice in January require Israel to, quote, take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to the allegations of acts with respect to within the scope of the Genocide Convention. So what that really is saying is we order you not to cover up the evidence that shows you're committing genocide. So it's not shocking to see them cover it up. But it says the Gaza Health Ministry is the only organization counting the dead, which they have destroyed. They've completely destroyed every measure, every tool they have to maintain all this. So they're taking physical counts at this point. The idea is that they, in a smaller sense, have violated the acts, the orders there as well. They've maintained genocide. They've maintained starvation campaigns, collective punishment, all of which are continuation of the crimes they were ordered to stop. But also, they've continued to not allow the preservation of the evidence. They've actively destroyed it, which, again, shouldn't surprise you at all. Now, here is somebody on the ground highlighting the same article, simply saying for someone who has been documenting this every day, He says, I absolutely can confirm the deaths are way higher than reported. He's a journalist on the ground. Whole cities have been wiped out. Most buildings and houses were bombed, most with residents inside. And this is backed up by 972 magazine reporting about Habsara, the gospel program, or the Lavender program, or even the admissions from multiple whistleblowers. They're murdering people. They all know it. They're laughing about it. Not every one of them, not every Israeli or every Jew, but a clear majority. Every day, he says, I walk into schools for the displaced. I see sick people lying around in horrific conditions with no treatments. Every day, people are falling ill. And every day, people are dying sick or not. We have no access to food, water, medicine, and people are exposed to polluted air from bombs and damaged infrastructure. Israeli occupation's goal is annihilation, and that's what they're achieving. Every day, they drag this out for some ceasefire holdout. They're actively achieving their actual goal. And of course, the American Jewish Committee says it's anti-Semitic. They say, we urge the retraction of the Lancet letter with its unsubstantiated projection. That's a really stupid thing to say. You know why? Because a projection is a projection. It's an estimate. One of the most common aspects of science is using the facts to project, to estimate where it's going to go next. And it's clearly stated as an estimate. They don't claim this is what we know for a fact. So they're taking issue with a scientific projection based on the facts that they too have acknowledged are accurate. Why? Because it shows you the uncomfortable reality. So guess what? Just like every uncomfortable fact, anti-Semitic. Surprise, surprise. It's embarrassing. That's the best they can do. Here, Dr. Mads Gilbert highlighting the fact that it may very well be up to 500,000 we're talking about here. That's not an opinion. I mean, it's an estimation. It's more than an opinion, but it's not something he's saying we can prove at this point. It's like the scientifically backed estimate from the Lancet. But the idea is that this is based on their independent, fact-based research. So take it as an opinion, but realize there's plenty of people backing up this assessment. And even the Lancet isn't as they say themselves, it's a conservative estimate. I quite frankly think this is what we're talking about. And this is horrifying.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, my friends. I'm Dr. Mads Gilbert. I'm talking to you from Norway. How many people have actually the Israeli occupation forces killed in Gaza until now, from the 7th of October? It is really hard to find that number. And I'll try to explain briefly to you why this is such an important thing to discuss, because by and large, we are getting disinformed and the numbers we are presented to are far too low. The Palestinian author, the one, you know, the lady who wrote Morning in Jenin, Susan Abul Hawa, she recently posted an Insta video going through the different sources, the material that we have to estimate the number of killed and dying people from disease. Now, the main source actually is this source. This is the UN OCHA, which is a United Nations organ. And you can see the chart here on the screen. This comes 3 times a week. This is the web page where you can find it. And it's very saturated with information. I'm not going to take all the details, but look at this here. This is the main field here. These are the number of reported killed, casualties. 37,953 as of July 3rd, 2024. These are the numbers of wounded from the bombing and the terror attacks, 87,266. So these are the people who have been killed, martyred from the military attacks, from the bombing, from the shooting, from all of that, and wounded. Very important number. But these people who are counted here are only the people who came to a hospital. Before the 7th of October, the Palestinian Minister of Health, who also report numbers, had a very good health information system. I know it because I've been using the data from this system in our research in Gaza. However, the Israeli occupation army destroyed the whole health information system, the computers, the central drivers, everything. So now it's been sort of counting by taking down the numbers, but the numbers are only those who have arrived to one of the hospitals. And by the way, more than half of the hospitals have been destroyed or closed down because of the Israeli terror bombing and the siege of Gaza. Now, so this number is the number of casualties or martyrs who actually have come to a hospital and being counted. And it is actually now also subdivided. So it's 25,000 around who have been completely identified. And of them, there are 10,000 men, it's 4,900 women, and it's 7,797 children. These numbers are, of course, higher than written here because it takes time to identify people. In addition to these killed, there are the ones who are buried under the rubble of the houses, the bombed houses, because the majority of the targets in Gaza are not military targets. It's, you know, where people live, apartment buildings, houses, refugee camps, and many, maybe as many as 10,000 are still remaining in the rubble of their own homes and the shelters they stayed in. And then in addition to that, you have thousands of missing people who are neither known to be in the rubble or in a hospital record or buried. And then you have the people who have been buried by the family. So if you add all these one up, you get a much higher number than 38,000. Now that's one of the problems, of course, with the ongoing slaughter in Gaza. It is the relentless terror bombing and shooting at civilian targets by the Israeli occupation army. But there is another big problem. This is my good friend, the Minister of Health in Gaza, Dr. Youssef Aborish, a brilliant doctor. He's a pediatrician, and he has been the staunch, extremely brave leader of the civilian healthcare system in Gaza during all these attacks, and for many years before that. He told me in November last year, listen, Dr. Mats, he said, it's not now mainly the bombing and the military attacks that's killing our people in Gaza. It is the triangle of death. And he called it the triangle of death, with starvation due to the lack of food entering Gaza and the destruction of the food basket in Gaza. The agriculture, the fisheries, the poultry, the dairy farms, and so on. And then it is the lack of water, which leads to dehydration and infections, because we knew from before this attack that as much as 90-95% of the water in Gaza was unfit for human consumption because of very high salination content and the contamination from sewage, because the Israeli occupation army has also destroyed the sewage cleaning system. And then you have the third part of the triangle of death. It is common diseases. You know, there are maybe as many as 10,000 or more cancer patients in Gaza. The Israeli army bombed the Rantisi hospital for children with cancer, and they bombed the Turkish Friendship Hospital for adult cancer patients. They do not allow cancer drugs to come in. So that's another important group of diseases. So you have all the infections. It's more than 1.2 million people now who are being infected because of the bad hygienic conditions, because of lack of water, lack of hygiene, stuff like soap and sanitary pads and everything you need to have a clean family. And in addition to that, it's burning hot in Gaza now, when with all the collection of the garbage that cannot be moved because the garbage collectors are being attacked and killed, and the sewage pumps being destroyed. So the flooding of the sewage in the streets, of course, in 38, 39 centigrades, it makes a hell of flies, mosquitoes, rats, all of these parasites that can spread diseases. So we have a very high number of diarrhea, vomit, skin diseases, hepatitis, and other communicable diseases. Extremely dangerous for public health. And then you have, of course, the cardiovascular disease with strokes, brain strokes, and myocardial infarctions. You have at any given time maybe as many as 50,000 pregnant women. You have 180 deliveries per day. There has been born more than 50,000 children in Gaza since the 7th of October. And all these women who are lactating and breastfeeding their children, they need clean water, they need good food in order to take care of their kids. So it's a massive mortality among those who are pregnant, who have difficult deliveries, who need cesarean sections, and the postpartum problems. And then you have, of course, the psychiatric diseases, who are in a very difficult position because they also bombed the one and only psychiatric hospital in the north of Gaza. And you have a magnitude of surgical diseases like gallbladders, gallstone, and hernia repair. So all of these diseases that would normally have a good chance of surviving, which is, you know, these are basic diseases, you survive that. But because of this, the destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza, they now have a very much higher mortality. If you add all these numbers and you make calculations from known mortality from these different diseases and conditions, my good friend Susan Abul Hawa, she has calculated that the actual number of killed, of martyrs, and of people dying, excess mortality in Gaza, sums up to a number between 193,000 and 514,000 Palestinians killed or dying from avoidable diseases. Between 193,000 and 514,000. It is a colossal number, and behind every number, there is a human being like you, like me, a family, parents, children, grandparents, grieving their losses. There has been a systematic attack and wiping out of complete families in Gaza. This is a horrible situation where the Israeli occupation army are committing 3 crimes at the same time: ethnic cleansing, collective punishment, and genocide. Now, these numbers are therefore extremely important, not at least to respect a human Palestinian life just as much as a human life in Norway or in United Kingdom or in the United States or in Argentina or in Japan. Every human life counts. We need to do more. We need to stop this now. As we are speaking, people are getting killed in Gaza by bombing, through starvation, through diseases that could have been treated. And the world is sitting, and the leaders are sitting with their hands in their lap, sighing and doing nothing. We need concrete action against Israel. Boycott, divestment, sanctions, just as the West have had for a long time now against Russia because of the occupation of Ukraine. You need to do more. You need to do more. You need to do more. I need to do more. Every one of us. We're living in the history books now. And history will tell who stood up against this genocide, against this apartheid system, against this slaughter of the Palestinians in Gaza, who turned their back on them, and who supported Israel. You have to decide for yourself, which place do you want to have in history? Shukran Iktir, thank you very much.
Well put. I just think it's important to hear the details, how far-reaching this is. Omar from Gaza, who is a pharmacist and a writer and a film critic from Gaza, highlights that Israel has banned the entry of all types of cleaning materials. The availability of cleaning materials has decreased by up to 90%. There's no more shampoo, hand soap, body soap, even laundry soap. The water is salty. Diseases have begun to spread in a frightening manner, especially skin diseases, hepatitis A. He says they're being overrun with lice and dandruff and all sorts of things they just can't treat. Temperature is high. He said, honestly, if we don't die from the bombing, we'll die from disease. That's a personal perspective. The same thing that Mads Gilbert is highlighting. They are all dying in slow fashion. This is torture. Now wait till we get to the displacement aspect again. It's just so transparently torture. You're telling them to go to a place that you're actively bombing it while they're there, and then less than 24 hours telling them to go to another place that's also being bombed. You're watching them run from place to place, and I guarantee somebody's enjoying that. Some of these sociopaths and psychopaths are, you're making choices where you know it's not feasible. You know that they can't get to those places at the time you're laying out. You know the bombs are flying everywhere. So all you're doing is causing them to be desperate. Knowing that the rest of the world that has an ability to stop it are ignoring it. Now, in case you need any more evidence, we've already highlighted this, but don't forget, 972 Magazine. On July 8th, put this article out. The title is, I'm bored, so I shoot. The Israeli army's approval of free-for-all violence in Gaza. There's no question. The governments of the world that are still a part of this are willfully aware that they're committing genocide. There's so much evidence. I've never seen this before in my life. IDF members, some of these people are part of the genocide and are gleefully acknowledging it. They think that they're immune from responsibility. Charlie Herbert highlights, quote from the article, every man between age of 16 and 50 is suspected of being a terrorist. Not suspected. They're terrorists. That's not what the quote says. My point is that's how they're treating this. And we've heard this from other IDF members. I'll show you a clip where the guy's going, and then 30 terrorists were born. And the guy's like, no, those are children. He goes, no, they're terrorists. That's the real mindset of a lot of these people. Palestinians are the problem. We've all been telling you that from day one. It's been obvious from day one. Oren Ziv from 972 magazine highlights his latest article on the absence of firing regulations in Gaza. It says, quote, I can count on one hand the cases where we were told not to shoot. Even with sensitive things like schools, feels like only a formality. And there's the article. Same thing. I'm bored, so I shoot. Now, you all saw they recently bombed another UN school, which sadly is such a common occurrence at this point. You just lose count. It's horrifying. Owen Jones posts this from Ahmed Al-Nak highlighting kids and families playing football. Israel hated that, so they bombed them. Simple as that. That's his opinion, but he could very well be right. Either way, it's a war crime. You're murdering children playing soccer. An entire school was bombed. There's no evidence Hamas is present. In fact, there's no evidence Hamas is anywhere they're bombing. Israel bombed, as Owen Jones highlights, the school while kids were playing football. At least 29 have so far been reported killed. Don't look away.
Oh, wow.
If you want to be further disgusted, go look at some of the comments in these videos. The laughing, the praising of it, all. Here's all okay with all that.
تم استهداف العودة.
يلا تروح
Don't avoid it. This is what people are supporting. I don't care what you think is happening. I don't care what you think Hamas is doing. This is murder of children in a school. Every single day this happens. Every single day this happens. Every single day this happens. And nobody in these positions of power are doing anything about it. Here's the Associated Press, kind of watering it down. Airstrike kills 25 in southern Gaza as Israeli assault on city shuts down medical facilities. It says an Israeli airstrike on a school-turned-shelter. No, it's still a school, mind you. It is still a school, but it's also a shelter for displaced people because they have nowhere else to go. Killed at least 25. It seems to be a lot more than that at this point, as heavy bombardment in the north forced the closure of medical facilities. Israel's new ground assault in Gaza's largest city is the latest effort to battle Hamas, they say. I love how we just assume that's what's happening, even though there's no evidence of Hamas being president. But how about the fact that what was the thing they kept saying about why it was not a large operation? Oh, that's right. There wasn't a ground operation, as Kirby said. Weird how he just doesn't even talk about that anymore. That was the narrative distraction for that week. Now we're talking about other things. We don't ever come back and go, oh, but wait a minute. Wasn't that the red line that was supposed to not be crossed? Wait, that's a minor operation. Even though 75% of the area is taken, it's minor because there's no columns of people marching in, Kirby stupidly said. Well, here we are. Funny how no one's talking about that, huh? This is an obvious, ongoing, major operation for the entirety of Palestine. That's what this is. They're murdering children. They're poisoning. They are raping. They are pillaging. They are burning houses. But who cares? Because it's all about protecting the Jewish population, right? Well, I'll tell you what. I don't care what you think it's about, whether it's protecting Jews or not. If this is what it costs, it's not okay. It's not worth it. But let's also then realize that's not what this is about. This is about Zionists taking what they want and using the Jewish population as a buffer between them and criticism about what they're doing. So again, making Jewish people more unsafe by its very existence. Zionism is anti-Semitism. Several 100,000 Palestinians remain in the north. You know, the area which we don't even get to look at right now. No one's even paying attention. They're probably, look, if we can see people littering the streets in the areas that are being looked at, mean, realize they're not even allowing even some of the Gaza journalists in some of these areas. I can only imagine the horror taking place over these areas. UNRWA wants you to know, this is yesterday, 4 schools in Gaza have been hit in the last 4 days. 4 schools in the last 4 days. That one you just saw, that was 1. There's been 3 more of those in the last 4 days. Yes, we're going to get into the ridiculous hypocrisy around what they say about the bombing of a school in Russia, in Ukraine. But over here, 4 schools in 4 days. Where's the evidence of Hamas being present? Doesn't matter. Israel said, so we ignore it. That's mainstream journalism for you. That's powerful people in positions of government that can make a difference here. People continue to flee from a place to another looking for safety, but nowhere is safe in Gaza. No school, no hospital, no UN building. It's amazing how quickly this became normal in the eyes of people in power. 30 seconds before this started, 1 UN member was the biggest story in the world. But now, Hamas or whatever, so just shut up. 4 schools in the last 4 days. That journalist on the ground that we were just pointing to, breaking massacre, Israeli occupation forces bombed the Al-Wada school in Khan Yunis. The safe zone of Khan Yunis. This school is housing thousands of displaced people, 30 killed so far, hundreds of injuries.
Ya Allah, Ya Rab, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Rab, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ya Rab, Ya Allah, majzara, Ya Rab, majzara. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله يا رب تعال خلاص بسرعة
Like, I completely get and understand not wanting to have to look at stuff like this. And I'm not saying you have to. But do not allow that feeling to stop you from pointing it out, from highlighting this, from calling this out. That's why, you showed a dead kid on YouTube, everyone censored graphic content, right? But here's all these images of them rolling over children, or rather, these examples that you can see on Twitter that are in the interest of what they want you to show you. All sorts of graphic content, but the ones, that's bad, can't show that, because they don't want people acknowledging, especially in Israel, what they're behind, what they're doing. So I know you don't want to see it, but make sure that you're actually still making sure others know what's happening. Here's the cradle. Over 15 murdered, and I guess this is increasing since then. This was reported on the 9th. Killed in the bombing of the school. And yes, there's very graphic images of the kids that ended up in the hospitals that were able to be made there because they have nothing else to remove people with. But it's all because they're fighting for freedom, Here's suppressed news highlighting another location, a new massacre by Israeli occupations against civilians in western Gaza. Children torn to pieces. Don't think anything can happen to wake up the world. It's overwhelming. One after another. Here's just a different location with dead children everywhere. But, it's all okay because Hamas. UNRWA highlighting this on the 11th. The school is sheltering 14,000 people in classrooms and in makeshift shelters in the courtyard. The facility has 25 toilets. The point is, this is another school. All these people that were able to get away without being murdered or maimed probably went to this school or any other number of these locations where they're desperately fleeing from place to place. How long until this school gets bombed? School in Deir al-Balah. Remember the name. It's just like clockwork. This will probably be the next one that they bomb. What are they supposed to do? There's nowhere else for them to go. It's not because they just want to be under a roof. That's part of it. They need things. These people don't have food or water, and these places don't have these either. But in some cases, this is where you might be able to find something. So you're going to the place they're going to target next because you're desperate. Your children is starving to death. Your child. So you risk going to the place where you could be murdered tomorrow because you need it, otherwise you're going to die today. What is that if not torture? That's what it is. I think I had a video
UNRWA school in Deir al-Balah is one of over 180 schools UNRWA has in the Gaza Strip, many of which have been turned into shelters during the war. This school in particular is sheltering 14,000 people in classrooms, as well as in makeshift shelters in the courtyard. Walking through the school, there are people sleeping in the hallways, even an elderly couple in the stairwell. Outside one of the classrooms, there were 2 children suffering from a genetic disorder that requires high protein intake, frighteningly malnourished, having been deprived the duration of the war. Staff told us the shelter hasn't had food to distribute since the 11th of March, as the parents...
Since the 11th of March. Haven't had food since the 11th of March, but let's keep pretending that's not happening.
Parents showed us photos of their once healthy children, unrecognizable from the sunken eyes, looking up from a filthy mattress in a hallway, skin covered in bed sores from not being able to wash. Our colleagues shared that 2 people had already died in this facility because of the lack of sanitation, and there is a spread of hepatitis A and skin diseases. The facility only has 25 toilets, meaning 560 people are sharing one single toilet with no hygiene products and a shortage of water due to lack of fuel to pump water from the water well. The conditions here are utterly appalling. People are being killed by bombs and strikes, and now they're also dying from disease and malnourishment, consequences of the imposed siege.
Just stuff gets to me. It's just that that's so transparent. All these people suffering. And the fuel, which hasn't been there since the beginning, since October 7th forward, there's another example. So yeah, look here, we give you all this water in this area you can pump it from, but guess what? They don't have fuel to pump it. Jewish Voice for Peace highlights the New York Times investigation has now confirmed that the bomb that was used, that killed all those children, that bombed that school, you know, which one? Yeah, good question. The one we just talked about, in case you were confused, because there's been so many schools that have been bombed. It's a Boeing bomb made in the United States. Killed children while they're playing soccer. Here's what the New York Times wrote. A video shot by the Reuters news agency at the site of the strike showed the fragment of a weapon. 2 experts, Trevor Ball and former U.S. Army explosive ordnance disposal technician, the weapons expert at the consulting firm, he identified the fragment as a part of a small diameter bomb, also known as a GBU-39, we've already referenced. The precision-guided bomb, which is a U.S. made, weighs about 250 pounds and is increasingly the weapon of choice for the Israeli military. Why? Because they go, well, the bigger ones are too dangerous. Yeah, pretty sure they all killed children, though. The GBU-39s were used in a deadly strike on the tent camp in Rafah on May 26th, which was a massacre. Right, but here, you know, Biden said 2,000-pound bombs are dangerous, so we're going to use the safer ones. You know, the safing murdering weapons that kill children, those ones. U.S. guys, this is weapons of merchants of death. Boeing and the rest of them are profiting off the murder of children. Your government is benefiting off the murder of children. Assault Rod highlights on July 9th, when this happened, the bombing of the school, almost 10 years to the day since Israel killed 4 Palestinian boys also playing soccer on the beach. A year later, the Israeli military cleared itself of all culpability. So let's continue to hear Matt Miller tell us they're investigating, right? We've raised the issue. You know, that one of the most obvious examples of the world saw where they murdered children playing soccer on the beach that made up some excuse about a location that was later proved to be the opposite of what they claimed. But yep, they cleared themselves. We investigated ourselves and we found ourselves not guilty. Guess what the U.S. said? They're clear. We blindly trust what they said. You know, democracy. And now, a year later, did the exact same thing. And in just a general sense, Al Jazeera highlights this Palestinian boy is collecting human body parts in a carrier bag after an Israeli airstrike on the Barij refugee camp, central Gaza. At least 9 Palestinians, including 5 children, were killed. That's just that's one of many examples of every single day we talk about this. Dr. Yara highlights children in Gaza are collecting human body parts after Israeli bombardments for identification. Why is that not a headline in all major news outlets? Because they don't care. Daniel Amotos highlights in a general sense as well, and this is directly from IDF soldiers speaking with local, with Al Jazeera reporting this, but speaking with local journalists. The whole area was full of bodies. Israeli soldiers hide Palestinian corpses ahead of the arrival of international aid convoys. Why? Because obviously they don't want the world to see what they know is wrong, but they don't care. Caitlin Johnstone highlights the point about the contradiction. As they write, oh, look, It looks like bombing hospitals is bad again. And I'm not going to play the clip, but the point is Biden tweeted this out. Russia's missile strike that killed dozens of children and Ukrainian civilians caused damage and casualties in the largest children's hospital. Horrific reminder of Russia's brutality. Can you even imagine being in this position and having the gall to tweet about that? We don't care about the 4 in the last 4 days, children, schools, 4 hospitals bombed in Gaza, but we're going to call out this one? Now, let's just even say Russia's completely responsible. They should be held accountable for it. How do you not talk about what's going on in Israel? We know why. It's a rhetorical question. Here is Starmers from UK and all the rest of them, for that matter, Trudeau and the rest, just in such flamboyant fashion, showing how hypocritical they are. Like just and they know we're paying attention. And this is what he has to say about Russia doing this, or the allegation, mind you, versus the provable fact that Israel did this. They're admitting they did this. This is their bombing. It's been covered. It's been shown. It's a U.S. bomb. Over here, we have an allegation. Now, there's dispute. Russia claims they were firing on Ukraine. It was Ukraine's hitting of it that made it hit this location. Just like the same thing is said reverse, which is certainly possible, or Russia's lying to cover it up. Your point is about that should matter, and we should investigate. But the fact is, on this side of it, we don't need to investigate. They know it was Israel, and nobody cares. They just go, oh, it's because Hamas, with no investigation and no evidence.
So, like us all to say with one voice that anybody who is responsible for these war crimes, and they are war crimes in Ukraine, will be hunted down and held to account before the International Criminal Court. As to whether each and every act is in accordance with the law, well, that will have to be adjudicated in due course. I think it's unwise for politicians to stand on stages like this or to sit in television studios and pronounce day by day which acts may or may not be in accordance with international law. I think it's not the role of politicians.
How embarrassing. I mean, it's the perfect cut, right? So here you are on that stage, adjudicating coming to the conclusion without, you're not looking at some UN investigation. You're not looking at some human rights group. You're just going, we know Russia bad guy, therefore this happened, therefore war crime. Just like we saw with Matt Miller in the conversation before. They knew, and now all of a sudden we need to wait for the investigation for each individual bombing. Remember how dumb that was? He actually said that. Now we're 8-9 months past this. Yeah, think of how many bombings there have been. He's actually trying to make you think they have to investigate each individual bombing before they can comment on any of them. Meanwhile, Russia blinks and they go, war crime. And maybe it is. But the point is, you're showing your hypocrisy. Clearly, these are all people that have an agenda. They don't care about human life. They don't care about any of this stuff, guys. That's the reality. And they're willing to use your lives, both their people and foreign countries, to achieve their goals, just like Zionism. Now, Saul Rod highlights what Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said. Russia's attack yesterday, it's on the 8th it happened, the 9th she's saying this, on the Children's Hospital in Kiev is not an isolated incident. It's also not in Israel, though. But part of Russia's continued terror campaign against Ukraine, hardly what that is, that includes attacks on hospitals and energy infrastructure. Well, no, it really doesn't, though. If you could argue that this might have been a direct action, and that would be important to highlight. Or you can find out, if you wanted to investigate, which they don't care to, that it was in fact a missile that landed, because it was fired and got hit and landed somewhere wrong. But it's not a recurrent thing. You can highlight all the times they've tried to lie about this when Russia has been exposed as, rather shown to not be what they claimed. Whether it's the lie about the rocket Poland or the Kromstok train station or Bucha in general. I mean, every single time it's been shown is for the extremist, openly neo-Nazi, if not Nazi elements in the Ukrainian government put there by Israel and the United States, provably funded them into position, are responsible for these things. Knowingly either allowing them, doing them themselves, or lying about it in general, like every other thing they've carried out. Their terror campaign? You mean like when the Ukrainian government was murdering people in Donbass for years, or attacking Crimea, or when they were the ones attacking the nuclear plant when Russia was in? I mean, it's just so transparent. Do you think she knows? Who knows? Maybe she's just not that smart. Either way, it's either that or she's a really dangerous villain of the world who is actively highlighting one thing you can't prove over here while ignoring the most obvious genocide we've ever seen over here. She says the international community must continue to stand with Ukraine. That's what she said. And Asal Rod highlights the UN news report that simply says, well, hey, nearly 600 attacks on healthcare in Gaza and the West Bank So just if you want to make all of these narratives about how it's all a bunch of lies, it's all Hamas holes and tunnels in Gaza, well, how do you explain the West Bank healthcare facilities that they're targeting? I guess we just won't talk about that. That's easy for you, right? Here's what she actually said. I have to read this. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, July 9th. She says, we are here today because Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, the current rotational president of the Security Council, attacked a children's hospital. If that's the only reason, then what's going on with Israel? Both should matter, shouldn't they? She says, even uttering that phrase sends a chill down my spine. Russia attacked a children's hospital in broad daylight, killing and injuring children. Right. Doesn't that seem like something we were just talking about? Seems like broad daylight to me. Funny how that one doesn't matter. You've got video, you've got evidence, you've got Israel use, you've got U.S. bombs. Over here, you've got a narrative that no one's investigated yet. This is still being fleshed out. But it sends a chill down your spine that Ukraine said. Over here, you know it's happening, but not even a mention, not even a discussion. It doesn't matter. There's nobody with a brain that can't highlight that contradiction. It's undeniable. They care about one, they don't care about the other. And one has a hell of a lot more evidence. Chilling, she says. Yeah, this whole thing is very chilling that you guys are such maniacs. Colleagues on Monday morning, Russian missiles smashed into civilian targets, including the children's hospital, the largest pediatric facility in Ukraine, and a lifeline for the country's most vulnerable. Yeah, exactly like the over 600 facilities in Gaza and West Bank that have been targeted. In the hours since, we have seen images of children, bloodied and injured, escaping the damage. And I'll show you, just like we're seeing over here, that they don't seem to care to mention. It says of cancer patients, just a few years old, hooked up to IV drips, huddled outside the hospitals, bombed out cancer wing. I mean, you could just make it broadly about any illnesses. You've seen people on stretchers, wheelchairs, people with amputees, infants in tiny incubator being rolled down the dirt roads because they bumped them out, they kicked them out of the hospitals, bombed the hospitals. Now that seemed to matter to Greenfield at the time. She says, we have heard the courageous stories of doctors and nurses scrambling to evacuate sick children. Yeah, all this sounds very familiar. You'd almost be forgiven for thinking she's talking about Gaza. Many of whom are intubated on ventilators to safety. Same damn thing. Of members of the community heroically sifting through rubble in hopes of finding survivors, of not adding another number to the rising death toll. How do you even say this with a straight face? She says, and I could go on, but the fact is that across the country, hundreds of children have been killed. Hundreds. Yeah, well, we're talking over 10,000 in Gaza. Funny how one matters and one doesn't. Thousands have been wounded. And millions have been displaced. Yeah. Oh, again, not in Gaza. As Russia continues the campaign of terror. It's just such, and again, it's to be very clear, I'm sure I've made it, we should care. Any child being killed, any displaced person, yes, it all matters. But all I'm highlighting is not that one is, look over there instead of over there. Yeah, we should care. If Russia did this and we can prove that it was intentional, or even if not, they're still responsible for the fallout, they should be held accountable for it. What I'm highlighting is that Greenfield doesn't care about either. She cares about the agenda. If she only points at one when they don't even know for sure what happened while ignoring the other, she doesn't care about either. They don't care about you or your children. It says, and then there are those children that Russia's deported or forcibly transferred. They just can't stop lying to you. You realize this was even acknowledged by U.S. entities that that's not what's going on. It's been verifiably shown, even by corporate media, that they spoke to the parents. They did this with parents' allowance and brought them to areas which right now apparently they're fed in schools. They're not abducted. And the point was that because there was a narrative around this, and there were some examples of people that were arguing. I mean, the point is there was a nuance to this story about parents that, the point is, allowed their children to be taken into an area where they were protected from the war. And then there was an example, at least from one that I saw, of course, covered by the corporate media dynamic, that where they said that they were unhappy with the way it happened, that they were misled about something. But imagine framing that into deported or forcefully transferred. While you can show Ukraine literally kidnapping children, literally raping and murdering in the streets, or in Israel for that matter, and occupied Palestine. The same damn thing. But here we are making up a story while Russia, not again, that shows that they aren't capable of all these same crimes. I think all these governments are simply helping these children by the admission of the parents. It's just so grotesque. 600 attacks on healthcare centers, according to the United Nations. Now here is Justin Trudeau. And here's the video first. Zelensky, of course, sharing it. Which, I mean, I think there's nobody, I think, claiming it wasn't a bomb. And then it cuts to a video, which I find interesting, right? So you don't know. That is the building. Where this is, who knows? I'm not even trying it's probably the hospital. I just think it's interesting to highlight the difference in the way these things are being shown. And you see some blood spots on the floor, broken things inside, and that's it. Right? I mean, that is not, I mean, especially coming from people like Zelensky who have been caught lying about the most egregious things. Why would he still maintains that was Russia that shot at Poland. Everybody, including the United States, acknowledged because they proved it that was their missile. He still lies about it. Here's Trudeau. Suddenly cares about human life. This is abhorrent, he says. Striking a children's hospital. Oh my God, a children's hospital. Like it's never happened before. And the innocent children inside cannot be justified. You're damn right it can't be justified. But it's funny how you only care about one. My heart goes out to the families who are grieving. Apparently only if you're in this location. And this Joe Catrone highlights the most important part. He says, buddy, are you for real right now? The article says the number of Gaza children killed higher than from 4 years of world conflict. We've already shown you this. The point is there's just no way you make sense of that. There's no point at which you go, oh, okay, that all adds up. More children have been killed in Gaza than in 4 years of combined world conflict. But all you can care about is the narrative over here in Russia. These people are a joke. Justin Trudeau, same statement on July 8th, and she simply posts the UNICEF highlighting lives of 1 million children, quote, hanging by a thread as child health services almost collapse in Gaza Strip. Don't care about that, Trudeau. These people are hypocrites. Greg Stoker, former special operations military, highlights from The Guardian. November 15, 2023. IDF says it has entered Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital in targeted operation against Hamas. That's how they cover what was the travesty, the tragedy, the atrocity that took place at Al-Shifa. That's the image we just showed you with all the bodies around the podium, dead children laid out. They massacred these people to show you a waiting room with a couple of guns in it, which we proved later that they brought in the building. Here's The Guardian, July 8th. No words for this. Horror over Russian bombing of a hospital. Funny how different that is. Now, to the cancer point. Remember she made the point about people saying, the cancer treatment has been stopped. Well, guess what? Hen Mazig, the one that blocked me on Twitter, makes a point about cancer because of the hospital. Israel told Ukraine that the children whose cancer treatment was disrupted by Russia's bombing yesterday can continue their treatment at Israel. Too many children have their health compromised by war. All kids deserve a chance, I guess, unless they're Palestinian, though, right? 436 cancer patients have died due to the ongoing siege in Gaza, which Hen Mazig openly supports for lack of treatment. You realize there was a point at which they tried to argue we should send them to Israel, and they declined. Zionists are trying to gaslight the world into thinking tens of thousands of dead are okay. These people are disgusting. Now, here's the point I mentioned before. Khaleesi highlights this. I've never seen politicians, she says, openly calling for the mass murder of children. They don't even hide it. Israeli Knesset member Amit Halevi from, of course, Netanyahu's Likud party. Quote, in the orthopedic department of Shifa Hospital, they caught 150 terrorists, which we now know were not terrorists. He says, and then they killed them. At the same time, 300 terrorists were born. So let's quickly take a step back and realize, well, those 150 are Palestinian. If he's calling 300 babies born terrorists, then clearly he's just calling Palestinians terrorists, because that's how they think. It says it right there. And the guy responds by saying, no, those are children, not terrorists. And he says, yes, terrorists. No, children. He says, I remember Halval being proud. Oh, that went back to the beginning. The point is simply that he is explicitly, unquestionably saying these babies born today are now terrorists. Because that's what we've always been telling you guys. That's what they think. Not every Israeli or every Jew, but the people we're pointing at, the Zionist organization, the coalition of the current government, most of the Israeli government, are openly, actively aiming and targeting children or anybody else but children. So there's no questioning this. And the world sees this. And so does your governments who are hiding it. Now, an interesting overlap, we saw a back and forth between Hezbollah, Lebanon, and Israel in regard to the Golan Heights and the back and forth in their border in general. And realize, let's not forget, the Golan Heights is a legally occupied territory in Syria, whereas part of the border area between Lebanon is also illegally occupied by Israel, which means their act of legal resistance does not require them to be shot at, as long as they're aiming at military targets. Now, AIPAC, of course, because it makes sense for a lobbying group about American interest regarding Israel, would suddenly report on Lebanon bombing Israel, right? Because that makes sense. No, it shows you that what they are is an instrument, a vehicle for Israeli propaganda. And it says Hezbollah link killed 2 Israeli citizens today. They were settlers. Iran's terror army in Lebanon, which is not what it is. Hezbollah is an organic entity that rose up in resistance to Israel, and it's of course supported by Iran, like a lot of their resistance movements are. But it says, is provoking a devastating war by attacking Israeli communities. That's not even remotely what's happening. It says, what would America do if this happened here? Israel is a right to act here. It's so funny how they frame themselves like they're part of America. Israel's right to act to protect its families from Hezbollah terrorism. Okay. Here's what it says. A man and a woman were killed today in a rocket impact near or in the Golan Heights. Okay, let's be clear about this. So they are illegal settlers who are there in official capacity because of Israel. So it's a fuzzy line when it comes to international law. But there's an argument to be made about whether those are people that are put, and let's realize in West Bank right now, and pretty much everywhere post October 7th, they've given them official capacity in regard to acting violently, which then makes them legal targets. Now, whether they were doing that here is up for debate. The point is that this is an illegally occupied territory. So they are acting in resistance against their illegally occupied territory. Because the point is, these were Lebanese, or rather Hezbollah entities we're talking about in regard to this back and forth. Now it says, just to be clear, I'm not justifying the killing of innocent people, not even remotely. What I'm simply highlighting is that the way they frame this is dishonest. And of course, leaving out the part that this is not about them just defending ourselves against terrorism. But so this was an attack on, let me close it. This is an attack on a bombing, rather, in regard to the location in the Golan Heights. And this didn't just start there, is the point. Hezbollah warned Israel, as Hadi highlights, that if they target civilians, which is what happened before this, that they would kill the settlers. Now, you could argue that's a violation in and of itself. Maybe you're right. But there is a fuzzy line around both the settler aspect of this because of what Israel's done with them. But nonetheless, just let's say it is a crime. The point is that they're responding to an act of them targeting their civilians. And it says, in response to Israel's killing of Lebanese children, Hezbollah killed 2 illegal settlers, which, by the way, he highlights were former IDF. So there is an overlap there. The occupied Syrian Golan Heights. Now, Haaretz highlights on the 10th, they say that the reason that they couldn't stop the rockets that fell, that killed 2 people, were because it was an open area that was not designated as, this just seems like a narrative to me. This whole game about rockets fell in open areas. Well, if you're talking about an open area where people are existing, it seems like a complete, honestly, I don't think the Iron Dome is even remotely what they pretend it is. I've said that for a very long time. It's sort of an illusion, quite frankly. Biden admin to soon transfer delayed bombs to Israel, showing you it's all happening forward anyway. This is the article from, I think it's the same day it was posted here. July 10th. The Cradle says, and this is on the 10th as well, Israel shells Syrian army sites in occupied Golan Heights. Right? So it's this whole back and forth. So you have examples of where Hezbollah, or rather Israel, is bombing into Lebanon. Then you've got Hezbollah responding and taking people out in the occupied areas of Golan Heights. Then Israel responds by bombing Syrian locations in the Golan Heights. Now it simply says the Israeli army shelled several sites belonging to Syrian Arab army in Golan Heights on the 10th. The attacks came one day after 2 Israeli settlers were killed by a Hezbollah operation in the Golan Heights. The operation was a response to Israel's assassination of a Hezbollah fighter. And as I understand it, there were civilians that were killed in their bombing. It says the Israel struck the vehicle that he was in on the Syrian side of the Lebanese border. But let's think, why is Israel sending settlers illegally to occupy an area in Syria? Because that's what they're doing everywhere. And that's the whole point about this. Even the United States argues these are illegal. It's not just the West Bank. You're illegally settling on taken territory. That is against international law. So think about putting yourself in a position where you're stealing someone's territory, trying to position yourself on it, which is illegal in everybody's mindset, and then crying foul when you're attacked for it. It's ridiculous. Absolutely absurd. Now, talking about the general displacement and attacks on the area of Gaza City, because this is important. This is part of the torture discussion as well. And it's, again, as they're over here crying foul about all these things that are being done to them, this is what they're doing to Palestinians on a second-to-second basis. Suppressed news highlights, based on local reports, the bombs hitting the homes in Gaza City, which, by the way, this is July 7th. So what I'm going to use this for to show you is that they are bombing people's homes in an area that 2 days later they say, now move out of the way because we're going to bomb right there. They were bombing before. So that's ubiquitous. Every single time I've seen this, they bomb where they were, they bomb where they're on their way, and they bomb where they're going. So there is no dynamic where they're like, get out of the way. Even, again, I haven't shown in a while, but I showed this so many times in the beginning because this was Amnesty International on October 20th, highlighting that they were proving that Israel was not being careful. They were targeting civilians. They were being indiscriminate with their bombings, or just I think what the three things were. Each one of these cases, they either violated the law by failing to take feasible precautions, carrying out indiscriminate attacks, or directly targeting civilians. Damning evidence of war crimes against Israel, they wipe out entire families. Now that's becoming more of a conversation. That was October 20th, 2023, guys. So the point is, it's just nonstop. And they are actively, willfully targeting innocent people with these large bombs. Now, in this case, the bombs hitting the homes in Gaza City, and this is on the 7th, guess what? GBU 28. Some slight variation, but same bombs they're being sent by your tax dollars. Manufactured by the United States to strike heavily fortified military bunkers, or tents in Rafah, whatever works. Right? So instead of heavily military fortified areas, you're just bombing people in an open area, or bombing people in tents, or bombing innocent people in schools. Each bomb weighs 2,300 kilograms, including 300 kilograms of the most dangerous explosive material. He says tritonol. Those bombs are being dropped on dilapidated roofs and tents, sheltering families, children, and the wounded. The point, those are supposed to be the bombs that aren't going anymore. Here we are on July 7th, where they're being used to murder citizens. Of course, this video keeps crashing, which is ridiculous. So Forensic Architecture, which has done amazing work so far in breaking down their lies, July 8th, the next day, highlight, Israeli evacuation orders continue to be instruments of terror and displacement. Palestinians in Gaza's old city, where they were just bombing yesterday, or 7th, before the day this is being posted, at Ali Hospital, were ordered to evacuate west, okay, only to be attacked there within the same day and receive another evacuation order under 24 hours later to a supposed safe area that didn't even exist. Do you think this is by accident? This is a planned torture campaign. So the video simply shows you what they're talking about. Order to evacuate west. Reports of families under siege right there. And then literally tell them to evacuate south. Less than 24 hours. So even if you think it was by accident, which shows you how completely out of control they are, or they have no influence over the actions of their average rank and file, either way, that's alarming. And innocent people are suffering. I quite frankly think it's very obvious this is deliberate. This is from July 10th. Israel urges Gaza City residents to evacuate, suddenly calling it a combat zone. July 10th. So this is the day before, in fact. So the point is that on July 8th, they were already, look at this, guys. They're bombing. That's the point of that second graph right there. They're bombing the area in the very place where they say 2 days later, get out of the way, combat zone, as they were already killing people in that area. It's all a big grotesque joke. Suppressed News also highlighting this. This is somebody simply saying they're asking us to evacuate the entire city now. Is it still a minor operation, Biden, Blinken, Matt Miller, Kirby? Where are we at? Is it no longer, is it a major now? The whole city? What a joke these people are. They want Gaza City to be empty, they say. Isn't this against any effing alleged human rights? Yeah, they all are. Here's one of the things they dropped. And again, if you look at the information on there, you can already prove that some of the areas they're sending them have already been bombed. It's the same every single time. Here, Haaretz. Israeli army calls on all residents of Gaza City entirely to evacuate south. What Al-Mawasi? What are we talking about? Every single one of the areas they're pointing at have already been bombed. And of course, they're lying and saying 60% of Hamas terrorists are dead or wounded. What a joke. No, not even their own people acknowledging that. Their own military have acknowledged that's a lie. They're desperate. They are absolutely desperate. Now, B'Tselem, the leading human rights group of Israel, which I'll include for you their post about why it's an apartheid state, which they write, B'Tselem, January 12th, 2021, not 2023 post-October 7th, but January 2021, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. You want to read it, it's horrifying. So B'Tselem spoke up about this and said on July 10th, Israel's demand for all Gaza City residents to flee their homes is absolute madness. And the international community must demand that Israel immediately stop the war. They've already done that. They've already done that many times. Israel, the United States, and their other lackeys refuse to allow it to happen. Based on Israel's actions, it appears that it intends to continue fighting indefinitely, sowing destruction and killing masses of people for the foreseeable future. They write, since the International Court of Justice's decision regarding Rafah, Israel has caused more than 2,000 deaths across Gaza Strip, which has increased. So the point is that when they were ordered to not do it, they went harder. They said, oh yeah, we'll kill even more innocent people. The UN Security Council must adopt an immediate and binding resolution that will end the war and return hostages, which they won't do because they'll veto it if it doesn't go exactly in the direction they want, which seems to be not stopping this at all. Now, here's a clip about July 11th, okay? So we went from the 7th to the 11th, right? And it was bombing on the 7th, and we pretend to get them out of the way on the 8th, and the 9th, they're bombing both locations. They're playing games with people's lives. On the 11th, in an area they were told to go to, Israel snipers are murdering people. See how that works?
We're standing in the northwest of Gaza City, where the ground incursion is expanding in the neighborhoods of Ar-Riman and Tal al-Hawa. As you can see, civilians are getting shot by the sniper stationed in Al-Wahda Street. As you can see, civilians here trying to rescue this killed civilian. He was carrying aid box for his family. He was targeted and killed by the occupation.
I saw a young man on a bicycle carrying canned food. The sniper shot him directly. Al-Wahda Street is currently blocked. We were unable to move his body. Even the paramedics were unable to access the street. They couldn't evacuate his body. Unfortunately, even the ambulance crews couldn't manage it. They had to turn back.
We wanted to pass through Al Yarmouk Stadium. The young men there told us to turn back. We asked them what happened. They said there were martyrs in the street. We came to ask for help from paramedics and firefighters to at least take the dead bodies so they wouldn't remain in the street. Otherwise, the bodies would be eaten by dogs.
Well, here is Doctors Without Borders. No end in sight. The repeated trauma of displacement for people in Gaza. Everybody's calling this out. Everybody under the sun, other than people blindly supporting the obvious crimes, are highlighting that this is criminal, that it's genocide, that they're doing this in violation of damn near everything they ever claimed they supported. And guess what? They were already starting to say that Doctors Without Borders was suspiciously close to Hamas. They were already getting this thing going. Now, in regard to the famine, which is a part of everything we're discussing, the fact that it's not just the bombing or the disease, is that they're actively starving these people to death. All these different angles, as Matt Gilbert highlighted, the triangle of death, it's explicit. Here's the United Nations highlighting what Elon Levy just literally told you was a hoax. Let me see if I even have that still. Maybe this one is it. Oh, good. This is the Rumble clip that Brock made. Genocide sympathizers claim famine is a hoax. The facts state otherwise. Now, at the time he made this argument, the very post that he was linking to in the first paragraph said, do not use this to deny that there is starvation taking place, which is exactly what he did. He's just a small little coward of a man, and they're all going to lie for what they need to achieve. Here is the United Nations, July 9th. UN experts declare famine has spread throughout the Gaza Strip. The recent deaths of more Palestinian children due to hunger and malnutrition leaves no doubt that famine has spread across the entire Gaza Strip, a group of independent experts said on the 9th. It says, quote, with the death of these children from starvation, despite medical treatment in central Gaza, there is no doubt that famine has spread from northern Gaza into central and southern Gaza. Spread from northern, which is why they don't want you to see what's going on in that horror show down there. Up there, everyone look at it. They're listing a bunch of children, by the way, that they can prove have died due to lack of nutrition. It says, we declare that Israel's intentional and targeted starvation campaign against the Palestinian people is a form of genocidal violence and has resulted in famine across all of Gaza. We call upon the international community to prioritize the delivery of humanitarian aid by land and by any means necessary, and Israel's siege and establish a ceasefire. And by this is while they're now permanently dismantling the aid pier, which I've already told you, well ahead of the major reporting, because we already knew that was happening, but now it's coming out and it's being the fact, permanently disabling the aid pier, or rather the pier used to murder innocent people, which is probably what the whole point was. I'll include this so you can watch the original discussion of their lies around famine. We'll come back to that last point about the aid, the pier. Here's the chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group. 6-year-old Hikmat Badar passed away due to Israel-enforced starvation and the prevention of food and medical supplies from entering the area. One after another. Francesca Albanese, highlighting Michael Fakhri, says UN human rights experts declare famine across all of Gaza. That's what we were just reading. That's just from UN Special Procedures, acknowledging the same point. Francesca Albanese says, yes, there is famine across all of Gaza. This is the consequence of Israel's intentional starvation used as part of its genocidal campaign. The world sees this. There's no question. Here is Smirkula, or whatever you want to call him these days. You know, the guy who, as Sam Husseini just recently called out, weirdly and grotesquely smirks while he's talking about people dying in Gaza, acknowledging but denying what's going on. Oh, it's super bad, but it's, nobody's fault, apparently. This is incredible. The IPC, which we've already told you, as this is the direct report that we were showing a week ago, reports that 96% of Gaza faces acute food insecurity. 96%. That's the IPC. The same report that Elon Levy childishly lied about to say it was a hoax. Here's this reporter calling it out to Matt Miller. You probably won't be surprised with his ridiculous response.
On that, the latest IPC report actually says that 96% of the population of Gaza is facing acute food insecurity,
which is what I just said,
level or higher. Yeah. So it's still very dire.
Don't you love those kind of responses? Yeah, you and me, we're the same. Dire, but we're right. We're on the same page. No, not at all, man. She sees right through you. That's why she's calling this out. But it's embarrassing to watch them try to pander, which is never the case. It's always the other way around. They're in the insecure position at this point, which is interesting.
And you've spoken about what the US has done, but the US also continues to be the biggest funder of Israeli military. And under US law, it is required that any country receiving military support must not obstruct the flow of humanitarian aid during war. And every major rights group, from the United Nations to Human Rights Watch, has said that Israel is using starvation as a tactic of war.
And they've admitted that. Even a statement right there, tacitly admit, it's bad and needs to get better. So they're also admitting that whether through deliberate action or just Israel's byproduct of what they're doing, that they are responsible for stopping some of this aid. That's it right there. That violates their own law, guys. They're not allowed, but they don't care. There are laws that stop them from delivering aid to Azov movement until recently, but they were doing that too. They're rampantly lawless. Rampantly lawless. Take the statement from George Galloway, which that's exactly what they are. Rampantly lawless. They don't care. They'll use the law against anybody, but they sure as hell won't follow it.
Do you disagree with them? And are you just, sorry, one final question. Are you not afraid of completely losing legitimacy?
Too late.
So let me just answer that.
Hypocritical when it comes to supporting human rights in one country, but not when it comes to Palestinians.
Let me just answer the first question.
I love how he's trying to stop her from finishing her point. Again, it's desperation, I think.
Rights in one country,
let me just
but
answer,
not when it comes to Palestinians.
Let me just answer the first question. So I would encourage you to read the report that we issued on this very question 2 months ago that looked into Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and their work and whether they had done a good enough job to let humanitarian assistance in.
A good enough job. Doesn't that in and of itself highlight that there's some part of it that's stopping it? So if they're not doing a good enough job of letting aid in, the only way to read that is that they're in some cases not letting aid in. I mean, it's just, they're so trapped by their own broken logic. They're admitting without even trying to that they're doing the thing that should invalidate them from receiving aid from the U.S. government, otherwise known as military support to kill children.
We said that there were some roadblocks that needed to be overcome, and we had worked to overcome those, and we had seen
as in blocking aid personally as the Israeli government, roadblocks.
Israel take steps to allow humanitarian assistance in. At times they have been too slow.
What does it mean to take steps to allow it? Just allow aid in. Like, we realize the process has always been there of check that, but it's not, this isn't some validation process that takes too long. Everybody other than the U.S. government has acknowledged that they are actively turning aid away and just refusing things they need, like gauze and soap. Oh, but Hamas can use soap, so we won't let it in. The same thing. It's all collective punishment.
At times they haven't moved quickly enough. At times there have been barriers that we need to break down, but we have worked to do it. And we have seen Israel take steps to allow humanitarian assistance in.
Don't you love that? That's my point every time. Oh, they're taking steps. We've raised the issue. It's the same old meaningless words. So if they're taking steps, and yet a week later, a month later, 2 months later, it's still the same problem. Maybe they're not taking steps, and maybe Matt's an idiot.
Now, there is, as I just said a moment ago, there is always something more that needs to be done. We've talked about the fact that you have a lot of assistance coming to Kerem Shalom now, but it can't move around Gaza as freely as it could because of looting by armed gangs. And so,
oh, I see. It's the looting by these notorious armed gangs. I'm sure that these exist, as opposed to the deliberate blocking of aid according to everybody, the United Nations, human rights groups, people on the ground. Even whistleblowers. I mean, it's obvious this is happening. Or these settlers being backed up by the IDF who are actively blocking trucks individually. But no. It's all because once it goes in, it's all Palestinians' fault. It's all the Palestinians. They're the ones doing everything.
We need to come up with practical steps to address that. And I say that to get at the point that I know sometimes everyone likes to make this seem like a black and white issue that is completely simple, where there's somebody that's blocking humanitarian assistance.
It's exactly what's happening.
When it can be much more complex. There can be other problems, such as the looting of criminal gangs, that we have to assess, and so we're working with our.
Right. So not other problems. The one thing I want you to focus on, right? Not like the suggestions. There's like a brevity of problems. Nope. There are other problems, like the one thing I need you to look at as opposed to everything else. Those gangs over there are doing it. That's it. End of story.
Partners in the region to try to assess that, and we're going to continue
to. I have to reply to that. Sorry, I just have to quickly reply to that. Sorry, can I just quickly reply to that point?
No, thank you. Thank you very much. On NATO.
Just nope, you, not you. You don't want to hear it. La. Just shut up. It's just so embarrassing, isn't it? Like, we should laugh. That deserves ridicule. We know what you're doing. Everyone in the room knows what you're doing. You're covering up for something we all know is happening. It's embarrassing. Now, I'll include this again from July 10th. This is the UN report showing you the same thing I've always been showing you on this, that they are not doing even remotely a fraction of what they should be doing to make sure that they even maintain the currently food insecure situation. What you're looking at is the decline of, I mean, it goes up and down a little bit, but well under 500 a day, which is necessary to maintain the already food insecure position. Basically all of June, they averaged 59 trucks a day. Allowed in, mind you. That's not even remotely what goes up. I showed you that on the other post, not on this page, but where it shows you the amount of trucks that come up to the secure area and then how many end up leaving. And the point is, it's like 30,000. It's ridiculous. They come up, but only like 1,000 that leave. And that's because most of them come up, but then get turned around. The only ones that end up on record leaving are the ones that go in and then come back out. So they're proving how many. It's like 90% of these trucks, they just continue to turn back based on those UN numbers. Now, that's just a random pull of a percentage off the top of my head, but it's clearly the majority. Everybody can see this. All the evidence is there. I mean, I only showed this part in regard to the 500 trucks and the incoming load, but check out this page. It's chock full of very damning information showing you that they're deliberately doing all of this. Now, here's Truth Out from July 10th. The U.S.'s $320 million pier, which you paid for, America, will be permanently removed months earlier than planned. How'd that work out, huh? Well, you effectively dropped some aid from the sky, which has killed at least 5 children. It's not a joke. And many of which have gotten sick from the aid that you dropped because it's completely expired and people are getting sick that way, right? And even that was a fraction. And in fact, we proved that once the pier went in, the amount of aid going through dropped by like a fraction of what it was, acting like more was coming through when in fact the pier was used as a reason to not send any more through. And then they never actually sent any aid through the pier. They just used it to facilitate illegal operations to kill civilians. And then they went, oh, job done. I guess we'll move on. $320 million. How much you want to bet it cost them? Like $500,000, and that all went to something else. We are always being extorted. We are always being cheated and lied to by our government in the interest, in this case, of a foreign government. Adam also highlights, again, taxpayers paid $230 million to be directly complicit in the massacre of over 200 people. Alan McLeod also highlights, let's not forget, this is not just Gaza. Your government, along with Saudi Arabia and Al-Qaeda, by the way, because they're working alongside them, which you can easily prove in regard to what's happening in Yemen, are being starved in Yemen. Or rather, I said that wrong, but those people are starving the people in Yemen. And this is hilariously stupid coming from the Economist. It literally says the drug that is starving Yemen. Famine in Yemen could be avoided if they just stopped chewing khat. It's a leaf they chew to get, high or whatever. Oh, that's what it is, huh? They're just a bunch of drug addicts and they can't get their life in line. And here's what Alan says. Is that drug called Western imperialism? Excuse me, imperialism? Western imperialism. Yeah, this is U.S. government action starving people for their agenda, along with Israel, because clearly it's about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the greater area around all the, the peninsula area of the other side of it for Iran, which is the Strait of Hormuz. So you've got the Suez Canal, and there's like these choke points around the area that they desperately want to control. And so they've invaded, occupied, and they still murder people in Yemen on a regular basis. But it's all because they're chewing that leaf. That's the only reason. What does that show you if not desperation? Now, here is the part about the ceasefire deal, which I think is very important to understand. This is the same story over and over, and it's hard for me even to discern sometimes, like, is that just a post about the one that happened a week ago? Usually it's not. It's embarrassing how they cycle through the same developments as if it's some new, oh my God, we're almost there. Suddenly, like it says here, a ceasefire agreement appears within reach. And you read it, and it's like, well, they have the platform set. Now they need to agree on the details. Okay, so it's not even remotely close to being reached. It's the same thing that's been going on for 9 months because Israel's determined to not let this happen. Just like everyone else is telling you, like Haaretz, but we'll come to that. Here, Ori Goldberg highlights, on July 6th, had an inside word on this. He says, unconfirmed reports, that was tweeted, by the way. I'm telling you, Twitter is so manipulative right now. Unconfirmed reports suggest Israel plans to sabotage the hostage and ceasefire deal that Hamas has accepted in full accordance with Israeli demands. Israel bombed a school we just talked about, claiming the school served as Hamas headquarters. There is a relation. Israel persists with the lie of destroying Hamas. This lie underpins both the rejection of the deal Israel itself concocted and the assumption that Israel can kill as many Palestinians as it wants if it claims Hamas was present at the scene. This is the root of evil. Israel has no right to destroy or exterminate anything. The reason Hamas cannot and should not be destroyed has nothing to do with it being an idea. Hamas should not be destroyed, he argues, because killing tens of thousands necessitates the killing of hundreds of thousands based on what they're doing. It really is as simple as that. No country has a right to kill, injure, or starve hundreds of thousands of people, or anybody for that matter. The presence of Hamas at a school or of an operative in a private residence does not make them legitimate targets. And that's the reality of what's happening. They claim that, no, we're going after Hamas and it's sort of the byproduct, but they know that's not the case, as they've even admitted to when they bombed the Jabalia refugee camp. The earlier one with Wolf Blitzer and how he couldn't. The point was that when they spoke about it on CNN, and he couldn't even take the excuse. So you knew that there were civilians there? He said yes. They bombed 400 innocent people. They claimed to get one Hamas member who turned out not to be there. That wasn't like we bombed the Hamas member and oopsie, it turned out 400 people were there. They knew it and deliberately took action anyway. There's nothing under the law that makes that allowable. Nothing. So the game that they're using is they say, well, they're legitimate targets now because we say Hamas is there. From day one, that has not been legitimate. And UN entities and plenty of others have said, that's ridiculous, you're lying, but the US and others have allowed it to continue. Israel chose a war of destruction from day one, he says. That is the rotten seed from which grew the tree that bore the fruit. Israel was not forced to embark on this path. The notion that we must eradicate Hamas and our feeling of entitlement are both self-deceptions. Most Israelis still believe Israel's within its rights to demand and carry out the eradication of Hamas. This is why most Israelis are supporters of the genocide, whether they like it or not. This consensus is the political and social foundation of Israel's crimes. Israel must stop this war in order to return its hostages. Most of us still fail to see the connection, but Israel must stop the war, in quotes, first and foremost because it is a crime and a failure. Israel's security has never been worse. Israel has never been weaker. The basic lie, the lie that Israel's allowed to destroy, supports the many lies Israel has told over the past 9 months. We think we are within our rights. The blood we have spilled and the blood we've shed blinds, and intoxicates us. This is a former academic PhD and somebody in Israel. Here's what Haaretz put out on the 7th of this month. How Netanyahu has systematically foiled talks to release hostages from Hamas captivity. I mean, make sure you read this. Never blindly just take a headline, but just the headline alone from Haaretz is powerful. That's exactly what we've been saying since the first week. Why? Because it's exactly what we could prove from the first week. Everybody else just didn't want to hear it. As it says, Netanyahu believes that an agreement on a hostage deal will most likely lead to his government's collapse. It will, which he seeks to avoid at all costs, including of Israeli people, including of Jews anywhere in the world, including of anything, Americans or anybody alike in the world, especially Palestinians, doesn't matter, as long as we keep what we want. He says defense officials who spoke with Haaretz said that in his attempt to derail negotiations, Netanyahu has relied on classified intelligence and manipulated the sensitive information. This is how Netanyahu systematically foiled the negotiations to free the hostages, meaning he stopped that what would have amounted to freeing all of the hostages many times. His people, Israelis know that. It seems to be only completely manipulated Western audiences within the paradigm that don't know that. Thought there was one other thing in there. Oh, I guess not. Now, I'm pretty sure there's one other part I highlighted. That what you're going to see in this whole article is every point, which is very important to read. You've heard almost all of this already on the show and individually during these time frames. But the point is you can prove that at each one of these moments, he was taking action that guaranteed this would not happen. But you're still getting lied to by your governments, by the Israeli government, because that's what they do. Dan Cohen highlights regarding this article, this piece laying out Netanyahu's treachery over the last 6 months is useful, but his efforts to sabotage a captive exchange began days after October 7th. He never wanted this, which Dan exposed at Uncaptured News, including a secret recording of him lying to the families, which I believe we played at the time because of Dan's work. Now here is a report from Middle East Eye. War on Gaza. Netanyahu accused of sabotaging ceasefire efforts. This is from the 8th of July. Benjamin Netanyahu has been accused of attempting to sabotage ongoing Gaza ceasefire talks by issuing a new set. Now, this is specifically in regard to the current iteration of this, not the whole time. Issuing a new set of non-negotiable demands. So the same thing. So now we get to a point where Hamas is accepting what they put forward. Everyone in Blinkens of the world are saying, oh, it's only on Hamas. Israel agreed. And they go, okay. And then Israel goes, but no, this too. And then we just pretend like that's not an obvious deviation from what they agreed to. It's a game. And even their own people are calling this out. It says, he said any deal must allow Israel to, this is what the stupidest part is, allow them to return to the fighting until all goals of the war are achieved, which we've heard them say, anybody paying attention. Now explain for me how a supposed ceasefire, which they pretend they want, is the same as going back to fighting when this stops. With the deal, not the agreement, the ongoing parts, but the deal, the negotiations. So once they're done with this process and we go through the step 1, step 2, we'll go right back to fighting and call that ceasefire. It's dumb. It's embarrassing. It's insulting to your intelligence. It says, secondly, a deal should make it impossible to smuggle weapons to Hamas via Egypt. That's something they'd added. It's like, well, okay, why would you wait until everyone agreed to add that? Because you're trying to trip this up. But here's the point I've made many times. We referenced the National Geographic article and plenty of others that seemed to openly admit that Israel was aware of the tunnels involved with the shipment, but were simply benefiting from it or profiting from it. And this at a time when we can prove they were funding Hamas. So realize that they're aware of all this infrastructure. In fact, I argue like with Shifa, they're involved with building it in some cases. So the game now to be like, they can't have that. It's not, it's only because it's a point of deviation from the original agreement. It says this clause was not previously part of the agreement backed by the U.S. and the UN Security Council. His third demand, and right there is clear. So if he adds it after the fact when nobody had known about it, it's designed to stop this. So they can then go, but Hamas won't agree. See, it's their fault. It says his third demand was ensuring the return of thousands of armed terrorists in Gaza was not possible. And what he means by that is not allowing anybody back into their areas in Gaza. You know, the promise he made, everybody can come back to their homes. You know, the homes that we've destroyed and flattened and rolled over with tanks. But now he's going, now they can't even come back. I will not allow them that all terrorists, which again is the very transparent thing, he's talking about Palestinians, to go back to their homes, which they're not going to agree to that. Previous Israeli ceasefire proposals indicated Israel agreed to a phased withdrawal from Gaza and allowed the unconditional return of displaced people to northern Gaza. That was part of the deal. So the point is he's just changed the entire deal, acting like he didn't, and the U.S. will lie for him like usual. Fourth, Netanyahu said Israel would maximize the number of living hostages returned from Hamas activity, which I don't even know what that means necessarily, but the point is you're just changing the dynamic after the fact. Finally, he said the outline agreed on by Israel for the deal and backed by the U.S. president allowed the release of Israeli captives without, quote, harming the other goals of the war. All he's trying to do there is pretend that he was somehow promised that even though we agreed with ceasefire, we're not really going to have a ceasefire. That you promised me secretly that I could go back to the war, right? Well, it's contradictory to the premise of the entire agreement. He says the publication of the hardened demands, which appear to walk back on previous efforts or offers from Israel, were aimed at delaying and damaging the chances of the deal, as even Haaretz and everyone in the world seems to be calling out now. An unmanned security source told them that, speaking with Ynet News, an Israeli platform. The demands are, quote, inappropriate conduct that will harm the chance of returning abductees home, he told Ynet. Another security official told Channel 12. So it's all in Israeli media, guys. Netanyahu pretends he wants a deal, but is working to torpedo it. So it's funny how everyone sees this, including Israelis in Israel, but Americans are like, you're a racist for saying that. Quote, it says, it is harmful to the discourse being conducted with Cairo and negatively affects all talks. That's where we are. Funny, you've heard this before when I told you this 8 months ago. Guardian News on the July 8th highlights this. Israel-Gaza war live. Netanyahu says ceasefire deal must allow Israel to keep fighting. I mean, can we just not laugh at this for a moment? As much as how this is a terrible reality, this is like preemptive self-defense. It doesn't make any sense. It's not a ceasefire deal if you have to go back to fighting once the objectives are met. It's not a ceasefire. This is a report from 3 days ago. Israeli minister says Israel hostage deal with Hamas would be humiliation. Okay, so what is going on here? Like, this is all you need to see is that they've never been serious about what they're talking about. They want to keep killing people. I hope that's clear. Now, Mohammed Shihada points out another very important part. Israel is openly bragging about terrorizing, pounding, and rampaging through northern Gaza for political reasons, not military. There's a word for that. It's called terrorism. Here's what the article says. as that translates. I'll show you this. The wave of raids in neighborhoods in Gaza Strip. They write this in Ynet News, speaking to somebody in Israel, is also a deliberate effort to pressure Hamas in the negotiations and stems less from military reasons. That's crazy. That's a big admission right there. It's right there. What that means is they are using military action against innocent people to pressure Hamas to do what they want. And that is probably not even the best, probably getting them to stop negotiating. Openly admitting to terrorism. Now, on top of that, which I'll actually show you now, since I think this is relevant to where we are. This was reported. I saw this mentioned by Gideon Levy in a debate on Piers Morgan. And this is legitimate. This is from June 12th. So we're talking about negotiations, right? We're talking about them trying to meet some kind of agreement to return hostages. Well, guess what? Not only are they bombing neighborhood homes to pressure Hamas, which is terrorism, Israel tells its courts that it's holding Palestinian prisoners' bodies as a bargaining chip for Hamas deal. Think about that. So you've got mothers who want their sons back, sons who have been murdered by indefinite detention without charge. That's what I mean. It's a body of prisoner. They're dead now. And they're openly discussing this for a bargaining chip. That's grotesque, guys. That's a war crime. But guess what? Oh, it's because of October 7th. They're all blinded by the hatred. Well, guess what? No, this is October 2019. Israeli High Court green lights holding Palestinian bodies as bargaining chips. Yeah, this is just who they are, guys. This is Zionism. That's what we're talking about. This is B'Tselem highlighting this, an Israeli platform, showing you that there are Israelis out there that are calling this out too. The point is that this is what the Zionist government is, and they're actively breaking the law everywhere they look. Saul Staniforth highlights Daniel Levy discussing how they're blocking this deal.
For a breakthrough are very slim because Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it's not exactly breaking news, continues to do everything to undermine those prospects. It raises the question that why have the US administration been lying to us since President Biden gave that speech outlining the plan on May 31, when they've been telling us for weeks, Israel accepts it, it's all good, there's only one problem, Hamas. That's not true. Prime Minister Netanyahu...
To be clear, that's been said for months at different intervals. Same exact narrative with the same exact dynamic, and then they act like it's a new thing again the next week. Oh, they're negotiating. Now we're almost there. And they just got caught lying, and they just ignore it. Over and over and over. This is not a one-time thing. This has been the same thing for multiple times over these many months.
Netanyahu knows that if he insists on continuing the war, the devastation, the destruction, what we saw again yesterday in Khan Yunis, what we see every day, the mass daily civilian killing events, he knows that if he insists on continuing that, there can't be a deal.
Right. So they know what they're doing is going to sabotage the deal. That's all this really is. Very simple. Here's the Washington Post. A Gaza ceasefire agreement appears within reach. U.S. officials say. That's how it always works. Framework is down to the details. You mean like every other time where that has got tripped up? Yeah. You know, they must know that. So they have an objective, clearly, to promote this as if we're almost there. Probably insofar as they can go then, Hamas broke it. Mark my words. Now, this is yesterday. It says, after months of agonizing negotiation, the Biden administration appears close to a ceasefire deal. The Biden administration, like they're really involved in making this happen. The bottom line is they're pandering to whatever Israel wants. Lying about every other aspect of it. Hamas won't allow X, Y, and Z. And we can prove they're lying. It's embarrassing. Months of agonizing negotiation. Like this has not been some back and forth. They have lied about it in the first place. They break the deal. Then they say, okay, well, we're still willing to hear what we said. I mean, put it this way. Hamas is not changing what they want. Maybe minor aspects of it based on certain small changes over the 9-month period. But the basic reality of we want a ceasefire, we want our hostages returned, has been the same. And they've offered complete deals for both more than once before this that Israel refused before it was even being highlighted. So the idea of agonizing negotiations, no, what you're highlighting there with a manipulative term is Israel lying, getting caught, and then going back to the beginning and just pretending to come back to the table over and over and over. It says that would halt major fighting in Gaza, release some Israeli hostages, and surge aid just to desperate civilians. Yeah, gee, I wonder why that would do that, because they're blocking aid. And it wouldn't release some hostages. The whole point of this is that it would release all of them. That's the only thing they're talking about. But Washington Post is trying to make it seem like an agreement for a temporary stop for some of the hostages would be a huge success. No, it would be a failure just like before. You would get a few people back for Israel. Israel would let some out, take more back, kill people, and continue fighting. Not even Israelis want that, because they know that that means more of their family members will continue to die, because not all of them are coming home, because they're bombing where they are. It's very simple. A senior U.S. official told me Wednesday, speaking with the Washington Post, that the framework is agreed and the parties are now, quote, negotiating details of how it will be implemented. So nothing's changed then, and you're an idiot. It says officials caution that although the framework is in place, a final pact probably isn't imminent. So what are you talking about? That's the paragraph right after what you just wrote. Clearly, this is a propaganda tool. And the details are complex and will take time to work through. No, it's pretty simple. It's clear what's happening. If a final agreement could be reached, it would be a ringing validation of President Biden's patient diplomacy. That's actually what they wrote. My God, it takes a special kind of stupidity to be this uninformed. America's role as a peacemaker in the Middle East. My God, these people are ridiculous. After 9 months of war, it says Israel wants to rest its troops and prepare for possible conflicts with Iran and its proxies. Oh, is that what they want? Please tell me more about what they clearly aren't doing. They want to destroy all of these people and want everyone else to do it for them. They don't want to pivot over. The point is that if you pretend they're pivoting to Lebanon, you think they're going to stop bombing and taking action against Gaza. They're going to continue to occupy it, continue to destroy it, continue to starve it, and the West Bank. What they want is for you to stop looking at Gaza. That's what this is doing. Washington Post being complicit in genocide. It says Hamas in rough shape, really, in its underground layer, according to U.S. officials, because clearly they know, right? No, they're just, what's going on? Okay, that's the truth. According to even IDF, Hamas is not even remotely hurting. Even if you want to claim that's the case, what's the evidence to back that up? They would be waving in front of you if they had some major success over Hamas. I haven't seen a single example. It says with low ammunition and supplies. You know what? They said that 4 or 5 months ago. It says it's also facing growing pressure from battered Palestinian civilians who are increasingly vocal in demanding a truce. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, I don't even know. Where is that even coming from? You're telling me now that there's a growing voice of Palestinians calling on them to find a truce? That's outrageous. What you're pretending is that that's not Israeli citizens calling on Israel to agree to anything being offered by Hamas. I'm sure there's some level of Palestinians asking for a truce to stop the killing. But most Palestinians are saying we are standing in resolute resistance to all of this. And yes, we want a deal to stop the killing. But it's not about them going, take the deal, agree to a temporary ceasefire. They don't want that. Most of them said, no, we want this to stop. That's the worst, most grotesque lie in this whole thing. Of course, nobody should be surprised. The Washington Post is a ridiculous propaganda platform. The stumbling block, they say, has been the transition to in which Hamas would release the male soldiers who remain as hostages, and both sides would agree to a permanent end to hostilities. They write that, mind you, with a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. So they can at least acknowledge that the only thing Hamas has ever wanted was a full, lasting ceasefire and withdrawal of forces and full exchange of hostages. It says each side feared the other would use the initial pause to rearm and return to battle. And Israel wanted to make sure it achieved its primary goal of blocking. You know why they said blocking Hamas from ruling Gaza? Because if they said destroying Hamas, well, then it would make their paragraph look that much more stupid. Because you can't destroy Hamas if you agree to a ceasefire. You have to understand, whoever wrote this knows they're lying. There's no way around it. And the point is, if you're acknowledging a permanent end to hostilities, the only reality is that Hamas demanded that other people acted as guarantors that Israel would actually do that. And then they used that to say, oh, they ruined the deal, which only showed you that they had no intention of doing that. I mean, a kindergartner could see through this. The breakthrough, they say, came recently when Hamas relented on its demand for a written guarantee on a permanent end of ceasefire. Okay, so like, so good. So you're not going to guarantee, you're not going to make sure we do this so we can not have to do that? Perfect. Then let's go ahead. As long as we can sign whatever we want to sign to get what we want and then not do what we're required to do because no one's going to guarantee it, then we're happy. Pretty simple. It says instead, it accepted the reassuring language of the UN Security Council resolution passed last month, affirming the U.S. negotiated deal. You know, the same thing that said ceasefire that Israel already said wasn't going to happen. Very smart, very intelligent. It says, here's the key passage. Quote, if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase one, the ceasefire will still continue as long as those negotiations continue. What does it even mean? So the non-permanent phase will continue until they do, and then of course what they do there is go, well, Hamas didn't do what they said. We're back to the war. After they got their people back, which is guaranteed to happen. The UN resolution says American, Qatari, and Egyptian mediators would, quote, work to ensure negotiations keep going until all agreements are reached and phase two is able to begin. Now realize, at no point in this is there any guarantee of a lasting ceasefire. The whole point is by phase three is when they were supposed to agree to that, and before that is when they already got all the leverage. Is anybody who's in business, it's so obvious this is not how anybody would conduct an agreement. We'll give you everything you need and then hope that you follow through at the end. Okay? No, you're going to get screwed. That's how that will work. Israel and Hamas, they have both signaled their acceptance of an interim governance plan that would begin with phase two. That's not even remotely what I see happening. It says in which neither Hamas nor Israel would rule Gaza. I don't think that's what Hamas has agreed to. Security will be provided by a force trained by the United States and backed by moderate Arab allies. What a creepy sentence. And drawn from a core group of 2,500 supporters of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza who have already been vetted by Israel. Does that sound like something Hamas would agree to? So you're saying, okay, U.S. government, you can pick people from allied Arab countries that have allowed the genocide to come in and support our government with people that you've picked from Palestinian Authority who are not part of ever. Robert's covered this, and Gaza's been clear. The Palestinian Authority is a tool of Israel. So you're saying all four things that have been allowing genocide are going to be what we want to choose our government? I flat out don't think this is true. Hamas has told mediators that it is, quote, prepared to relinquish authority to the interim governance arrangement. Well, a U.S. official said. Well, seeing as how they keep lying about what Israel wants and does, I find it hard to believe anything like that is true. Or they've agreed to this and are being lied to about the fact that it's going to be Israel and the United States picking who's in position. None of this makes any sense whatsoever. The bottom line is, why does any of this make any sense if we already know, according to Israel's media, that Netanyahu will never allow it? It's just so embarrassingly stupid. Now, suppressed news highlights what Hamas said. Now, you can find what they're saying. I have it right here, in fact, this little tab. That's Hamas is like where they post their statements and so on. It says, we have not yet been informed by the brother mediators of any new developments regarding the negotiations aimed at a ceasefire and exchange prisoners. Sort of different than what the Washington Post just vomited out about what Israel wants to do. The occupation continues its policy of stalling to buy time with the intent to sabotage this round of negotiations, as it has done in previous rounds. This tactic will not deceive our people and their resistance. Kind of sounds a bit different, doesn't it? So we're being fed BS everywhere. These are dying power structures that are desperate to keep you in their mindset. Of course, one of these, I shouldn't even compliment him by saying he's part of a dying empire. This guy is a feeble, and like, what would you call it? Like a phantom limb. This guy's not even part of it. But here he is trying to pretend desperately because I'm part of this guy's trying to act like he's involved in some kind of process. He is an unemployed entity who's clearly just pro-Israel Zionist, pro-genocide, actively lying for the agenda while he gets laughed at online. That's what's happening. It says Israel achieved the first hostage release deal by clobbering, what are you, Beaver? Clobbering Hamas so hard it was begging for a breather. Oh, is that what happened? So you're pretending that they were being clobbering them so hard that it took 8 more months to achieve nothing? Does he believe that? How embarrassing. That's not even remotely what happened. Nobody thinks that. Ultimately, they were in a position, here's the actual way to remember this. If you remember what was happening at the time, The only reason Netanyahu was forced to actually come to any kind of an agreement was because they were failing, because they were pressured by people that wanted it to stop. In the first month, what was their statement? Nope, we're not going to deal with that. Hostages are secondary. That was their own statement. In fact, I think I can get it to come up. There we go. This is just the CBC article or video, but this is from 8 months ago. And this was what they said. You could listen to it. There's plenty of posted statements about it. Defeating Hamas is primary. Everything else is secondary. Now, you have direct quotes from them saying hostages are secondary. Now, that changed, at least narrative-wise, because they were failing, because they were not achieving their goals. And in fact, if you now look back and the information we now have, they were getting destroyed, tanks getting exploded, people being killed. They weren't telling you any of this. So the bottom line is for him to so clumsily come out and say they were being clobbered and that's why they had to do a deal. It's silly. But he goes, AP reports heavy battlefield losses are pushing Hamas into having a deal. It's so ridiculous how they just keep trying to sell you on what we can all see isn't happening. They're being destroyed. So let's take 9 more months to defeat them. As the military has already admitted that they're not able to do that. How sad. How absolutely sad. Now, talking about hostages, what about the Palestinian hostages? You know, who are actually hostages, not detainees or PLWs. Innocent people who aren't even charged with a crime, who spend decades in jail. You know, actual terror dungeons. Guess we don't care about that, right? As Rania points out this great video.
Hostages. Israeli hostages.
The Israeli hostage.
Israel hostages.
Israeli hostages.
Israeli hostages.
The mainstream media continues its hyperfixation on Israeli hostages, while predictably, the reality of thousands of Palestinian hostages is not of concern. Since far before October 7th, since 1967 to be exact, Israel has arrested and detained over 800,000 Palestinians, about 20% of the total Palestinian population in the occupied territories, and 40% of all Palestinian men. Those who weren't detained administratively were charged in the sham that is the Israeli military court system, which produces a conviction rate of 99.7%. For the occupation, imprisonment has always served as a primary tactic in the thwarting of resistance. Therefore, this number always skyrockets during major moments of popular resistance and revolt. For example, during the first Intifada, Israel had the highest per capita prison population in the entire world. However, the post-October 7th reality is something that Palestinians have never experienced before. Over 9,000 Palestinians currently languish in Israeli prisons and makeshift detention camps. According to Tal Steiner, the executive director of the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, this is a 100% increase from recent years. Reports of torture in Israeli detention in the last 8 months have included practices long used by Israeli intelligence, but escalated to the extreme. The harshness of this treatment, however, has been reserved for Gazan hostages, swept up by the Israeli military during its genocidal operations across the Strip. From the little we know now, at least 35 Gazan detainees alone have been killed in Israeli detention, but much is yet to be uncovered. This torture has reportedly included physical beatings, the prolonged use of tight handcuffs, causing injuries routinely resulting in amputations, the increased use of sexual assault, attacks by dogs, electric shock, forced sleep deprivation, denial to access to toilets and showers, and the denial of the right to practice their religion. The subject of prisoners in particular has exposed the double standards and blatant racism in Western mainstream spaces, who not only ignore the plight of the Palestinian hostages, but justify the slaughter of tens of thousands of Palestinians to secure the release of Israeli hostages.
Oops. So I'm actually going to leave this for the next show, hopefully tomorrow. And I feel like I don't want to go past, if I do these last two, it's going to go way farther than today than I want. But what I was going to talk about at the end was going to be kind of on the tail end of that, the example of the torture that's taking place. And that was what I was just kind of showing there. I'll just briefly show the image of this guy who came out, who looked like this as a bodybuilder, who came out and now it looks like this. And it's just this. I'll just play the video real quick so you can see him walking out, which is just, it's horrifying. It's not just he is a shell of the man he was. He can't think properly, he can't speak. He's been traumatized psychologically, physically. This is what happens. And he was released without charge, mind you, after all this time. What is that if not illegitimate detention and terrorism and torture? That's exactly what it is. But I'm going to leave it there for time today, and I'm going to end up following up with this as well as which I already kicked off once before, but I think this one is important to highlight and take time on, it's about the West Bank. And just the idea, which we've already highlighted, but the idea that this is so transparent. It's not just Gaza and Hamas. I mean, it's all war on Palestine. And the settlers and what they're doing both in the West Bank and Gaza, it's open, it's transparent. Actively stealing land, actively killing people. It's very clear. But I'm going to leave it there for today. So thank you for tuning in. As always, I know some of this stuff can be very hard. But it's a time where we need to kind of, I think at the time of the world where it's important to, tough out these hard things for the betterment of everybody. And again, I'm not saying you have to engage with all this stuff. I know some of this can be very difficult, but at the very least, make sure that you inform yourself about what it is and share the information, because it is so very clear that the majority sees this. But there's still, like I've highlighted so many times in these conversations, there is something blocking some change. And I believe, as always, my instinct tells me it's the paradigm division, because people can't see beyond that. We can't get any real motivation, any momentum behind these changes because of that. But whatever it is, come to your own conclusions about it. If we have this moment of so many people paying attention to the reality that one of the largest problems in the world, and these governments are just goose stepping forward. They just don't seem to just keeping going, arming, funding, lying. Here's your next RSV shot. Here's your next COVID shot. Just one more thing after the other. Clearly, we're missing something. We have to be able to move this into actual change. So give it some thought. Take some time to think about where we are and how we can affect change in different ways, and just help spread the word. Because trust me, even if we add nothing new to what we're doing, we're making a difference. Every day we talk about this. Every day we go out in the streets and talk to people about it, have protests, talk to our congressmen, call whatever you think is going to make a difference. Every single day we are making people see what's going on. And whether we get into some kind of actual action or not, which I'm actively hoping that we do, and I'm talking about as a community, I myself am taking personal action in my local community every day I can. My point, though, is whether or not we do, eventually we will get to a point of tipping the balance, where they will, like we're seeing with the corporate media suddenly acting like it cares. That's one of those examples. They see that they need to, because it's no longer working for them to toe the line. And that in a moment can happen with government and everything else, where suddenly there's just too many of us that cannot be stopped. I know we can do that. We've done it before, and as always, that things get co-opted, it gets changed. They redirect momentum, which will probably, that's the yin and yang. It'll always be a dynamic that's happening. Let's not miss this opportunity, whether it's about stopping the killing of this moment or trying to build something better for our future. I believe we can. So thank you for supporting this platform. We'll continue to fight as long as you do. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.